Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the regular business meeting for the District of Squamish for January 21st. We are meeting tonight on the traditional territory of the Squamish Nation. Council has an amended agenda in front of us. There was a number change to section 7A1 sub 1, so that 41,536 number is changed. The agenda first went out without the report on the perpetual affordable housing policy, which is in blue pages in front of you, but doesn't differ from the electronic version you received. We also added a letter to the correspondence, which is 10C. So with that, if there's a motion to approve the amended agenda, moved by Councillor French, second by Councillor Stoner, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Any notice of motion? Seeing none. We don't have any delegations this evening. Consideration of unscheduled public attendance. So this would be anyone from the public who feels they have an issue that can't wait for 2 weeks to be on the next agenda. All right, so we'll move on to our timed item for this evening. This is development permit number 517, 38012 Third Avenue. And the public will be given an opportunity to speak to the variances on this DP, but we'll let staff present. I'll let council ask clarifying questions, and then I'll go to the public for comments. Over to you.
All right, good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Kerry Hamilton, planner with the Community Planning and Infrastructure Department, presenting to you today Development Permit 517, located at 38012 Third Avenue. The project also includes Housing Agreement 2717-2020. The subject lands are located at 38012 Third Avenue and is currently the site of the Squamish Budget Inn, a known SRO single-room occupancy that provides short-term and long-term accommodations. The owners have been transparent with the residents about the redevelopment dates and process and confirm that all current tenants are aware of the DP application. This is the first known DP for this property. The 2018 OCP broke up the downtown into different land uses in line with the previous, but not adopted, downtown neighborhood plan. From a land use perspective, the property is surrounded by downtown commercial center, which is the yellow, which supports future higher density mixed use. The property is also at the periphery of the transition between downtown commercial center and the downtown residential, which is in green. Sorry, those colors are a little hard to read on the screen. Currently, the property is amongst an area in transition with a mix of residential and mixed-use developments. It is surrounded by C4 zone, which is that red portion properties, and with the exception of the southwest corner, which is zoned RS2. The development design concept is of a mill and a mine intended to reflect the industrial history of Squamish. The mill is characterized with simple form, sloped roof, and wood frame construction. The mine is expressed as a heavier concrete form to define the residential entry and to ground the building. The simple form of the mill reduces the ratio of the envelope to heated volume and helps the building meet energy targets, whereas the roof slope reduces the overall building massing, allowing for skylights to add more natural light to the upper stories and provides an angled surface to maximize solar energy gains. The DP application seeks to allow for the construction of a mixed-use development offering 67 purpose-built rental units to be secured under a housing agreement, along with 471 meters squared of ground floor employment space. The residential lobby is accessed off 3rd Avenue, with commercial fronting both 3rd Avenue and Victoria Street. The site is vehicle accessed by 2 entrances off the laneway to access 2 stories of parking garage. Parking is also offered directly off the lane and are built to larger standard space dimensions that are not required in the downtown, and this is to accommodate larger vehicles such as trucks. Both Victoria Street and 3rd Avenue frontages will receive upgrades as part of this development, including a portion of the separated bike lane along 3rd Avenue and the addition of 9 street trees. Streetscape details will be finalized at the time of servicing agreement. Primary facade treatments include dark gray corrugated siding and board form concrete. Accent features include angled court and fins and wood soffit. And the light gray metal corrugated is used to break up the massing along the facades and is also used on the roof surface to mitigate urban heat. The applicant and architect have provided 3 sustainable sections in their architectural package. One section speaks to how the building complies with each DP energy efficiency guideline. Another speaks to the use of PV solar panels that are modeled to produce over 77,000 kilowatts, representing a 20% reduction in annual electricity energy use of the building. And a final section speaks to how the building is exceeding the BC Building Code Step 3 total energy use intensity targets by 6% and the total energy demand intensity by 16%. There are 6 variances being proposed to Council with this DP application. So I'll use the next following slides to provide an overview of each variance, but note that each are described in detail in Appendix A of this report. So the applicant is seeking a 1.09 meter height variance. The variance accommodates a mezzanine addition, as highlighted in yellow here on the slide, which offers an opportunity to add more 2-bedroom units to the building, resulting in more family-oriented rental units. Given the amount of variances being proposed, it's important to note that the building was initially designed to meet the regulation of the day at the pre-application phase. An FCL height bonus regulation that allowed for multiple downtown buildings to achieve a height of 21.5 meters was adjusted in 2018 and no longer complies to these mixed-use buildings. So the image on the slide shows the height comparison between the recently built Lauren, which is on the left there, building, and this is the proposed building height in the dark black. It's also important to note that although the variance would increase the overall building height, the sloped roof will reduce the building's apparent height massing, seen in the left photos. And the sloped roof also slightly reduces the shadowing effect that could result from a flat roof building that actually complies to the height regulation. So this is seen in the right photo with the red lines in all the images representing the height of a flat roof building that meets regulation. It's hard to see, but probably better on your package. So given these reasons and the need for dedicated rentals, staff are in support of this height variance. The amenity space variance is seeking to amend the recent indoor amenity space regulation to include outdoor space within the indoor space requirements. Currently, C4 zones do not have any requirements for outdoor space. The images on the screen provide a visual difference of the building with the variance and without, showing that the applicants can comply to the regulation should council wish to not support this variance. As this is one of the first few buildings to apply this new indoor regulation, and given that outdoor space is fully covered and complies to the DP guidelines, staff are supportable of this variance as we explore how this new indoor regulation is adopted. The interior setback variance is one that staff recommended, as the image on your screen was the one initially proposed by the applicant to comply to today's C4 regulation. Staff have recommended this variance to the C4 zone as staff are working to prepare OCP compliant zoning bylaw changes for council consideration later this year. As this area is in transition to support continuous commercial streetscape frontages with designated mid-block corridors, the current C4 setback language does not really address the challenges of growing a downtown commercial center within a current mix of residential homes. Further, having narrow inactivated corridors between each development can become safety concerns and are not compliant with DP guidelines, which further rationalizes staff's recommendation on this variance. So downtown Squamish cannot support underground parking, which poses challenges to building design, as parking needs to be accommodated in areas typically used for employment space, such as ground floor commercial or second-story office. Squamish also requires really progressive bike storage requirements and waste facility sizes, adding to the constraints of these ground floor spaces. In sum, development in downtown Squamish is a balancing act. And although the current C4 regulation has been shown to work for standard developments, when you add other bonuses to the mix, such as rental housing, it can make the balancing act more difficult and in some cases unattainable. In other municipalities, rental housing dedications are matched with density bonuses, such as height bonuses for extra stories and units or parking reductions. We have seen this at rezoning level in Squamish and in the mud zones, but there are currently no density bonuses at development permit for C4 zone specifically. Currently in Squamish, we offer priority processing for 100% rental housing developments, which can reduce typical wait times from 8 to 12 months to 6 months, which is definitely beneficial and well used, but it does not address the balancing act of development, developing a mixed-use building in downtown under the C4 zone. As this is the first proposed dedicated rental building in downtown Squamish with the C4 regulation, a number of variances have been proposed by the applicant to make this balancing act work to accommodate this community benefit. So the variances include a reduction from 20% commercial space to 9.2%, an increase in commercial cash and loose stalls from 7 to 10 stalls, and a reduction from 1 required loading bay stall on-site to 1 off-site. There is precedent for the loading bay variance on corner lots downtown, given the space constraints on the ground floors. And as district staff are currently exploring new ways, new off-street loading regulation and shared on-street loading spaces best practices, staff are in support of this variance. As Squamish is growing with a vision of walkable downtown with access to alternative transportation options, such as car share and transit, staff are continuously questioning and exploring the right balance for parking, noting that it cannot go underground and thus takes away from developments having more commercial space. In this case, the variance is supported by staff because all residential units will be dedicated rental, with research showing that dedicated rental buildings typically use less parking than market residential developments. Finally, the employment space variance is one staff would generally not bring forward to council. In this case, the variance is proposed as an exchange for the 100% rental housing. Staff acknowledges that both employment space and rental housing are district priorities, and therefore the decision is before council to obtain direction on what is more appropriate in this case, as both are challenging to achieve on this property, while still keeping parking variances to a minimum. Staff are generally supportive of the variance as proposed, as they find a balance to accommodate 100% rental housing. The loss of employment space for the 100% rental benefit is more supportable on Third Avenue, as it is closer to this transition area of the downtown residential neighborhood area, and there continues to be a substantial lack of purpose-built rental in the downtown area. So moving on from variances, DP 517 was presented to Advisory Design Panel on October 17, 2019. The ADP passed the following motion with full support for the project and no further review, which is the highest motion that can be given to a project. That said, the committee did make mention of a few recommendations that the applicant has adopted into the revised proposal before council this evening. They include a full schedule with details on adaptable unit features for 10% of the rental units, increases to parking stall sizes where possible to accommodate larger vehicles, and the addition of solar panels to further meet sustainability and building efficiency goals. This development touches on 3 council strategic priorities: the planet and environment. The development exceeds Step 3 building code requirements and meets all energy efficiency development permit guidelines. The economy and local jobs. With the loss of second-story commercial space, the development does not meet the objective of this priority. However, dedicated rental housing could benefit local employment and industry, as workforce housing is in high demand. Housing affordability and diversity. The addition of 67 dedicated in perpetuity market rental housing units in the downtown is in line with this council priority area. There are also, this project also meets 9 OCP policies. They're summarized above, but are provided in more detail in your report. They include special considerations to be thought of for market rental housing, goals and objectives, infill of underutilized land, reduce automobile reliance, provide vibrant and active public realm, pedestrian-oriented commercial services. This project does not meet 3 of the OCP policies, and those are really around concentrating commercial development that serves the day-to-day needs of Squamish residents in the downtown area, given the loss of the 20%. Encourage a diverse commercial residential mix of land uses in the downtown, and encouragement of development of commercial space on second stories in the downtown area, which this one does not provide. So DP 517 project was posted to the district's development showcase. One request for a public information meeting was received, so no public information meeting was held. Variance notices have been sent to residents within 100 meters of the property as per legislative requirements. So staff's recommendation is that the District of Squamish authorize development permit number 517 for the property located at 38012 Third Avenue in Squamish, subject to the bonding for landscape works, $150,000 in cash in lieu in place of the 10 commercial parking stalls. And this is to go to the District of Squamish Alternative Forms of Transportation Reserve Fund, registration of a public right-of-way, registration of a housing agreement to secure all these 67 residential units, and registration of a covenant to secure solar energy infrastructure and installation of on-street loading bay, and finally a registration of a flood covenant on title. The recommendation also includes the following variances: for height, interior setback, employment space, indoor amenity space, parking cash in lieu, and off-street loading bay. Lastly, the recommendation from staff includes first 3 readings of the Housing Agreement Bylaw 2717-2020 to secure the dedicated rental units in perpetuity. There are alternatively, council could refer this development back to staff in one of 3 ways, and that would be to refer it back to staff to meet employment space regulations instead of requiring the housing agreement, to explore increasing the parking variance in order to achieve both employment and rental housing, and also just an open one that you could refer back to staff following other recommendations. Thank you.
All right, Council, any questions for staff before we go to the public for comments? Council Cahill?
Why are we, there's a suggestion of a covenant around solar PV infrastructure, and I'm wondering why we would have that specifically, because I think our goal is not necessarily solar, it's getting to zero emission buildings, and so why would we not have some sort of covenant around that? And I also sort of, as a side note, notice the proposal is photovoltaic cells to offset electrical, which is already fairly low GHG, and still maintain the same amount of gas. And I think that's, so I'm just wondering why we're not sort of something to deal with that and get it to zero emission.
Through you, Mayor, I think when we present these projects or the solar panels as a benefit to council, we want to ensure that we're securing it. So we're requiring it through a covenant just to secure that it actually is done. The language around how it's secured is not, could be changed. You could change the motion to say something different in terms of the energy efficiency, but we kind of kept it open so that when we write the covenant, the details can be locked in there.
If I may add to that, it's also important to make sure that we have agreement with the applicant on all of these conditions, and so the applicants in our negotiation process, we arrived at an energy source that the applicants can provide, and so this, the notion that we need to move towards buildings that are completely energy neutral is something that is new, and so these developments that have been in the process for the last year, starting at the pre-application process, that sort of get a little bit caught in the middle of that change.
So another topic, I'm just wondering how we square, because you mentioned some areas where it's not compliant with OCP, this proposal, and we have, there's 100% market proposed, and that is generally a qualifier for our priority process, and in my mind that's sort of the benefit received. But then on top of that, it's talking about providing less employment, which is another priority area in that same policy. So when you're already getting the benefit of going into the policy, I'm wondering how we rationalize that it's okay to give up on something we've also identified as a very high priority in terms of the employment. So, it seems that we're giving double the benefits possibly, or is the value of that rental benefit so valuable that it qualifies you for priority, as well as having a reduction in employment and other things we've identified as a very high priority.
Yeah, well, I'll maybe just begin through you, Mayor, to just clarify that the priority process policy allows, has different categories. One of the categories is 100% employment space. The other category is 100% rental. And there's another one for affordable housing. This one is complying to the 100% rental. It doesn't need to comply to both. As per the OCP policy, not meeting some of the objectives of the OCP policy, that's really referred back to council to make that decision tonight. Staff have been, given this project as it's a trade-off. You get, it's one or the other. It's the applicants have informed us that they can't do all of it. So it's really up to council to make that decision this evening.
Any other questions, Councilor?
Not just yet.
Councilor Stoner?
Thank you. Going back to the solar panels, the diagram in our package shows that there's only panels on one side of the roof. And I'm just curious, or if there was discussion about putting solar panels on both sides of the roof.
Through you, Mayor, it might be a better question to ask the applicant, but my assumption is just the angle of the sun and maximizing that.
And then I'm curious about the breakdown in the types of units. So there's only one 3-bedroom unit, and I understand that we're allowing a bit of a height variance in order to allow some additional 2-bedroom units, which are a little bit more family friendly, but not entirely. And so I'm just curious about discussions around the breakdown of the types of units per building.
So through you, Mayor, we have policy that says that these mixed-use buildings should accommodate over 20% of us 2-bedroom and 3-bedrooms. This one is, I believe, 50% or more, accommodating with mostly 2 bedrooms and the 1 3-bedroom. There weren't discussions around changing that, mostly because it met the policy.
Subsequently, in the diagrams that I looked at, it looks like we're proposing that the bike lane is going to be protected by the parking lane. And I just want to flag that because our pilot studies to date have shown that our commuters who ride by bike are not super supportive of that, so just something that I flagged when I went through the diagrams. And then I just also want to confirm that these are all market rental, none of them are proposed as affordable rental at that point.
So through you, Mayor, the final design of those streetscapes are really going to be looked at in more detail. We've definitely put conditions in the landscape review to say that, to address some of those comments. And the second one was, sorry.
Confirmation that they're all market
Yes,
rental?
confirmation that it is market rental.
So none of them will actually apply to council's strategic priority.
No.
Councilor French, then Hereford, then Anderson.
Thank you. There are large balconies on the 7th level, and I'm wondering, are those private, strata, public? What kind of access?
So through you, Mayor, the ones facing north are private access. So those are private outdoor spaces for those residential units on the top story. And the one facing south is a public outdoor amenity area.
And it looks as though there are storage spaces on each individual floor. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. I don't think I've ever seen that before, so it kind of caught me by surprise. And one last question. There's no mention that, or I didn't see any mention of electric vehicle charging anywhere in the parking. Is that being considered?
Yes, through you, Mayor, it is listed in the legend and it is accounted for as per our regulation. I just didn't speak to it, sorry. Lots of stuff to speak to tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Hereford.
Thank you. I was curious about the indoor-outdoor amenity space, and somewhere in some of the documents given ADP, maybe it said it was trellis covered, and I was just curious if we're talking about covered, waterproof covered, Squamish covered space, and yeah, I didn't quite see that outlined in the list of materials used or anything.
Through you, Mayor, I believe they're providing a clear cover, so it's still kind of letting light in, but it is a full cover area.
Okay. And actually, I think that's good for me for right now. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Anderson?
One of the recommendations is the provision of $150,000 cash in lieu in place of providing 10 commercial parking spaces to the Alternative Forms of Transportation Reserve Fund. My question is whether staff have given consideration to the option of allocating this money to a downtown parking facility fund.
Yes, so through you, Mayor, it's a good question. We have considered that, and because of the location of the site being on the Third Avenue bikeway, and with the cross section of the Victoria Avenue, which have both been streetscapes that have been identified that need some upgrades, definitely more for the pedestrian and cycling realm. We thought that money could be better used for that neighborhood for those uses, because that's definitely going to be an expense to the district for that. That was why it was recommended.
If I could also add to Kerry's point, the Alternative Forms of Transportation Fund is fairly new. I think it's only 2 years old, and so we're trying to direct more money into that fund at the moment, because all the funds that were previously collected are not as flexible as this new reserve. They have to be spent on parking type of facilities.
I'll come back to you, Councillor Bigelow. In the staff report, in the last line under economy and local jobs, it says purpose-built rental housing is less likely to end up in the short-term rental market pool. And that made me a little bit nervous, because I just assumed we would make sure it can't be used in the short-term rental market pool through the housing agreement or the covenant. So can you just clarify why that's in there? I'm assuming no one can STR these purpose-built rentals.
That's correct. The enforcement side of things it would be easier for the district versus just pure market units where every unit is individually owned. Here we'll be dealing with one owner essentially, so reaching compliance in these situations is much easier.
So the mayor's question actually reminded me of one other thing I wanted to ask. Why a covenant to secure the rental as opposed to the new rental zoning? Is there a reason why we wouldn't zone this as under the new rental zoning?
Through you, Mayor, it would have to go through a rezoning process, which is different than a development permit in this case. So, and you want to add some more?
Yeah. So we are looking at, in the zoning bylaw update, we will be looking at expanding the rental zoning, but the rental zoning doesn't apply to this property at the moment. So it's just a development permit. We couldn't apply rental zoning at this point without going through a district initiated rezoning.
So I'm just trying to wrap my head around where what we're using to find our comfort with compromising on the amount of employment space and the amount of parking. And my understanding is there's a whole lot of residential approved in the downtown area. We're looking at a community where you can walk and then maybe bike to the vast majority of the services you need and the work you need to do. And so I'm wondering, do we have, I've seen some formulas on parking based on just number of housing units or just employment units. Are we considering more when we're looking at this like the proximity of employment to residential, and therefore, yes, there's enough employment space to employ all the people that we plan to live within 2 minutes of here. Therefore, we can give up this many parking spaces. And so those three things are tied together. And I know we have a study coming. I can't remember what the name of it is. And is it that getting at that, or do we already have that data, or what are we using to decide it's okay to give up some employment space and parking spaces?
Through you, Mayor, there are a number of studies underway, including an engineering study around the parking. And there's also work to be done with the zoning bylaw as well with our parking regulation. Parking is constantly evolving, and we're constantly having to continuously review it and compare it to different best practices, compare it to different research. that we're trying to get in Squamish. You know, we've got a lack of data as well to help us quantify that. So I don't know if we're specifically looking at it in the terms that Councillor Predigal is speaking to, but we definitely are thinking about all the different aspects around, you know, finding that balance of losing parking, keeping parking, alternatives to parking, and making that, as when we bring this forward to council, you know, we've definitely done that look through of trying to make sure that this is practical with this 3-stall variance.
All right, Councillor Reese?
Thank you. In the conversation about the market rental and securing it in perpetuity, does stratification enter that conversation? Is it intended that the building will be stratified?
It's intended that it's under one strata, so it's one ownership.
So it will not be stratified?
Correct.
And would the covenant say that?
Yes. Through you, Mayor, it is, the housing agreement is a part of your package tonight as well.
Okay, seeing no further questions, I'll open the floor to the public. Both the proponent and members of the public do have the opportunity this evening to be heard and to present verbal or written submissions about the variances only. And because this is a DP, speakers can only speak to the variances. So that is, of course, the variance to the maximum height, the variance to the interior side setback, the variance to employment space, the variance to indoor amenity space, the cash in lieu variance from 7 to 10 spaces, and finally the variance to the off-street loading requirements from 1 off-street loading space to 0. So if you'd like to speak, just raise your hand. I'll ask you to approach the podium. Please state your name and your address, and you have 5 minutes to address council. So I'll ask if there's anyone from the public that wishes to speak this evening. Yeah, come forward.
Okay, my name's Ed Collett.
You'll have to come to the podium. Just don't touch the microphone. That'd be great. Thank you, Ed.
Okay, my name's Ed Collett. I'm with 8th Avenue Development Group. Taizo Yamamoto's here with us as well. He's the architect. I just want to say a couple of things to the project, and I think some background on, I guess, our history of who we are as a company and what we're trying to bring to the community. We've never developed in Squamish before. We're primarily the Lower Mainland in Vancouver. And it leads up to what we designed and why we designed it the way we did, and I'll address some of the comments about the greenhouse gas emissions and versus the electrical tower. So our company our goal is to be one of the most sustainable development companies in North America. And we're proving that out in that we built which helped drive the City of Vancouver's green building policy. We built an 87-unit passive house rental building under what's called a Rental 100. So that was 85 units in perpetuity for life. In that case, it was 60 years of the life of the building. It was the largest one in North America at the time that was built. It wasn't greenhouse gas free. It did have gas powered hot water, but that passive house just drove down that energy use across the board. We're currently building another 52 units of passive house in West Coquitlam. That one will be greenhouse gas free, and because they're individual units, it allows us to bring electrical hot water in a more efficient manner. The third component that we've done before is very successful. We built a co-housing project, a 35 unit multi-generational family co-housing project in East Vancouver. What that taught us to do was understand how a community is formed within. That was a stacked townhome project. It allows to drive circulation, drive common amenity space, because in that case it was a 6,500 square foot common house. But how do we create a circulation inside that building? How do we create a community that interacts with each other? We're applying those passive house principles to all our project, passive house design principles, and these co-housing principles, again, how you drive the community. Right? So I think, So when we designed this, this rental building, we saw the need was for rental, right? That's what was speaking to us, right? We saw the need to build it in a sustainable manner. So part of what we did that allowed us to exceed the building code, we're taking, in the past code, it's all about the envelope. You can seal up that building and not let the air, the warm air escape. You don't have to recreate the energy. That's what drives down. It's a very simple matter. That's what drives down your energy use. So in this case, it's the quality of the windows, the insulation around the windows. It's taking the insulation from the inside and put on the outside. So again, we're trying and meeting an air leakage quality level that we're going to target on that. The passive house principle, that what drives us also is the simplicity. How do you make a building simple to operate? Which in the case of a rental, you need to keep your costs down to operate that building, which allows you then to get that building built. So in this case, one of the reasons for the solar panels was it allowed us to bring down our common area costs. Right? So the electrical meters will be individually metered, so the tenant's picking up that cost, but we need to drive down that cost that allows us to get that building built. In the city of Vancouver, it addresses the comment about, did we get a benefit already of the priority processing? In the city of Vancouver, what drives them, what allowed that passive house building to be built was a reduction of DCCs, an elimination of DCCs. That was through $400,000 in that case. An increase of 2 stories in height, which allowed us to create a little more density, allowed that to happen, and a reduction in parking. Right? In Squamish, the way your policies are, we're constrained. Right? The parking drives the unit count. We want more units, we need more parking. Right? So then that affects us with the employment space. So where do we put that employment space? We put as much as we can at ground level. We need parking, we need bicycle storage. We then go to the second level, that needs to be the parking, because again, our unit count we need to have that parking. So that takes us down to the third floor. Do we put that employment space on the third floor? We look at that and say, okay, well that creates, we can do that, create a mixed use issue, use on that floor, but it creates a security problem for some of the tenants. They're not going to like that, right? So it's like a water balloon. You squeeze it here and it squeezes out somewhere else. So your policies are more restrictive that way, which I guess we're ending up where we are now. And even the variances we've asked for, they're technical in nature to allow it to happen. So that side yard setback, we wanted more room to allow our parking area to breathe a little bit, where we get some more larger cars in there. So that,
You've got another minute.
Okay. The market rental in this case, we actually do have we couldn't put it in our package, but we are working with BC Housing on this project. They've given us provisional approval. They're going to provide us with low interest financing for the construction of the project, and our requirement that they require of us is we're meeting a middle income threshold for the tenants in here. So it's their definition of affordable in this case. It's a mid-market, middle income housing. That's what we're driving. We're committing to do that. We couldn't put that. We don't have that deal signed yet with BC Housing, so we couldn't promote it here. But that will happen. We'll give you our word on that. So as long as BC Housing is still in business with that program, that's going to be. Anyway, I just wanted to give you that context. Yeah, that's it. That's all I have to say. All right. So I hope that helped and gave you some.
Yeah. Any questions, Council, for the proponent while he's there? Okay. I agree.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Is there anyone else from the public that wishes to speak tonight on these variances? Come forward. Just state your name and address.
My name is Taizo Yamamoto, 202 33 East 8th Avenue. I'm the project architect. I just wanted to touch on some of the questions that were asked regarding the outdoor amenity space and the outdoor space on the rooftop. We are at a 6-story building with a mezzanine, and that roof is on the 6th level. So we get into issues of building height classification if that becomes a shared space. So that's why we did a rooftop pop-up for that element. Solar panels, they were oriented for the best solar exposure. The amenity is glazed on top, so that is a weather-covered space. And then just to reiterate, sorry, that the variances are really being driven by our desire to provide as many rental units as possible. So height is a minor increase, but perceptibly will not look bigger than a compliant building. So we kind of tried to make the building mass and form speak to Squamish in terms of its character and language, but also to perform in a way that is sympathetic to the streetscape. And we, this challenge of raised parking and with some of the challenges of Squamish and building here, I think led us to think of a building a bit differently than we would in, say, Vancouver, and allowed us to come up with this concept which kind of formed the whole process, the shape of the building, the simplicity of the form, and all of those things work together towards achieving the sustainable goals, both from performance but also from a social aspect and provision of living on top of working space. And then one note I would make about the energy model and the breakdown of energy sources. This is always a challenge to hit that demand of energy. We also are limited with size of transformer that we can actually fit on this site. So we are working to reduce our electrical loads as well and find a balance between some use of gas in a way that still works with the overall maintenance and the life cycle.
Thank you.
I just want to follow up on that last comment with the life cycle of the building, and thinking like we need to be 45% below our current emissions with a 50% population increase, and so that's not a 45% per capita decrease, that's an absolute decrease by 2030, and I think by 2050 we're at 0% emissions. And so often when people talk about the life cycle of a building, I hear the number 60 years or something, but 50 years, we're talking 30 years. And so I'm just wondering, when you say life cycle and gas and thinking about these things, what life cycle are you speaking about, or lifetime?
Is this a question back to the architect?
Yes.
Sorry, I should have kept you out.
Oh, sorry.
I guess when I referred to life cycle, I was referring as much about the maintenance and the ease of upkeep of the building rather than its the life of the building itself. But I think that what we're proposing is also introducing other means of renewable energy that can be a model for Squamish. So the solar panels, for example, people will see that it can be done. And hopefully that can also provide other means and other examples that we can kind of help bring to Squamish. I think the fossil fuel aspect is still something that we struggle with, but it's also, the industry is kind of not quite there yet, where it's actually not a viable option for a building that's trying to hit budgets and trying to hit the feasibility of actually getting it built and maintained.
All right. Thank you for your answer.
Can I just add one more to answer that comment on that?
Sure, come forward.
Okay. You could create, there is a way to do it to eliminate greenhouse gas emissions, and that's air source heat pumps. Right? What that does, it increases the capex on the building. Right? It's a piece of machinery that's going 24/7. It's constantly going, so the maintenance of that, the breakdown of that equipment. That's my comment earlier, trying to keep it simple. That's part of the exercise there. We elected to take the dollars and put it in solar panels instead of the air source heat pumps. That's effectively what we did there. We agreed to spend more money, but that's where we chose to do it for a couple of different reasons. Anyway, that's the background on that answer.
Anyone else who wants to speak to the variances this evening? All right, any last questions from council? I don't need to do that 3 times. Any last questions from council? Okay.
move the staff recommendation.
Okay, so you're moving, we have to do the last two resolutions separately. So this is everything that up to and including the variances. Moved by Councillor Stoner, seconded by Councillor French. Would you speak to your motion?
Yeah, we'll speak to it. Thank you so much to staff and the components for all the work on this project. Personally, I quite like the form of the project. I think it does suit downtown core lighting. It's a very appealing building from my perspective, and I like the simplicity of it. I think that is something that we need to strive for more broadly. It does raise an interesting question, and I think staff are bringing it in such a clear manner in terms of some of these trade-offs that we have to work through. I think trying to force additional employment in all of our buildings is a nice idea, but we know that there are limitations to it, and there has to be some give and take across buildings. So I'm not as concerned about the employment variance on this one in the exchange of those rental market suites that will be given over in the covenant. In terms of the parking variance, I'll also speak to that one because that is always a hot topic, but it is only 3 stalls really that we're looking at in terms of the variance here, and so I'm willing to support that in this scenario. I am looking forward to the parking study coming back to council and having a broader discussion about where we're at more broadly downtown parking-wise in terms of allowing cash and move for future development. So I think in this scenario I'm okay with it, but I am looking forward to having that conversation in council coming forward. Last but not least, I'll speak to the support for the indoor-outdoor space. I think that this is one of the first components that are coming forward, and I think that's a really useful use of the overall space and provide a little bit more flexibility in that building. So I will be supporting this motion and look forward to the vote.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Anderson, and then I'll come down here. Yep.
Yes, I'll also be supporting the motion. I think with Councillor Stoner that the lack of purpose-built rental in the downtown area is our priority focus here rather than on the commercial space. There is going to be commercial space coming on stream in the downtown area. I'd like to comment briefly on a few of the design features that I think deserve note. Accommodating larger vehicles. I appreciate that the advisory design panel discussion has borne fruit on that issue. I think that would be that is something of value. The extra storage space on each floor that Councillor French has referred to, I think that is also noteworthy. Staff have referred to official community plan policies. One of them in connection with affordable housing is design considerations, and I think this is one of them. This relieves the pressure of needing to go to the business park, for example, to hire a storage unit, and that is something we should all be concerned about with respect to preserving space in the business park for other uses in terms of employment. So that storage space on each floor I think is very innovative and interesting. The roof design has a number of advantages, and finally I appreciate the efforts that the developers have exercised in also reaching out in the community that I'm aware of on distinctive design and reference to Squamish heritage. I think they've taken a thoughtful approach that has possibilities to develop further as they finish the building, and I think that thoughtfulness deserves some note. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. Councillor Pettingill?
Yeah, I won't be supporting this motion. I would support sending this back to staff, but, and I may move that if this fails, but the reason is, I think my sense is that we don't have enough employment yet downtown, and I think we need to match our employment to the residential we're bringing in. I understand we need rental, but I think we don't want to be building rental for commuters. We want to be building rental for people that can walk to work, and so I'm very nervous about giving up employment to get rental, especially when we've already allowed the priority permitting for this. And I think for me that's some accommodation for what rental there is, being all rental as opposed to market for sale. The other piece, I guess a comment for our staff, I don't know that we should be coveting covenanting particular modes of renewable energy. I think, our focus needs to be on zero emissions. And so any sort of things we put in, it should be about getting that emissions profile down. I don't want to constrain a developer or future owners from doing all kinds of new things as new technologies come around. So I'm very nervous about restricting this to PV. It might be a great option now and would encourage any developer to follow that to the degree it makes sense. But again, for me too, the fact that this is offsetting low GHG electricity as opposed to the very high GHG gas is a real concern, especially when I look at the targets in our climate emergency resolution. We can't be adding gas to any buildings and hit those targets. So, we need to be bringing what's here now down, and anything we add on just makes that so much more challenging. So, as is, I'm not comfortable supporting this.
Thank you, Councillor Race.
Thank you. I will be supporting this. I like other councillors have mentioned, like the Foreman character, it is a bit distinctive, and there were some interesting architectural features. I don't have a problem with the variances. I was initially concerned about the lack of setback on the, I guess it's the north side, having a zero setback, until I read further into the staff report and heard from staff that actually it's part of a larger plan to kind of fill in that block in some areas, and so I'm content with that. I was initially concerned about the lack of employment space, or the reducing of the employment space, and I was part of some of the discussions, I think last term, when we actually provided those requirements for buildings being built in the C4 zone. But I think this is a trade-off, and I think in this case I can live with that trade-off in return for rental accommodation, which I think is a very needed part of our housing spectrum. And also because this is kind of on the periphery of that C4 zone, and I'm personally a little bit more concerned about, I think, some of the C4 properties closer to the Cleveland Avenue corridor, and less concerned about this area, which is a transition to housing, so I can live with the one floor commercial.
Thank you. Councillor Berkman?
Thank you. I'll be supporting this this motion. I do like the overall sort of end product here. I was a little overwhelmed with the amount of variances required to get us there, but I see it as both staff and the proponent striking that balance that moves things forward rather than and none of them do I really have a problem with. It is in as Councillor Race alluded to, that sort of transitional zone of our town, and I think these trade-offs make sense in that space. I would prefer to see the heating, I think it's just gas, hot water, and cooking. I'd love to see that removed, fossil fuels removed from the building. But I don't see that as holding up the other trade-offs that we've already worked through on this project. So I'll be supporting. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor French?
Thank you. I'm also supportive for all the reasons we've already heard. I think there's some really great design features that make this work in our downtown Squamish. I think this design has captured the Squamish vernacular. I'm supportive.
Thank you for using that word. It's my favorite word. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Pettingill opposes. Motion carries. Thank you.
I wonder if we might have a discussion in the committee of the whole at some point just about the priority policy. When there are a lot of compromises, and they may be necessary, I'm not sure. For me, I'm not sure we do all the compromises and the priority. I think for me the priority is for the projects that hit all the basic marks and go over and above on at least one. But if we're doing a whole bunch of compromise, that may be reasonable, but not on top of the priority. So I would appreciate it if other people are interested to have a bit more discussion on that.
Can I ask a clarifying question to staff? So given Councillor Pettingill's comment about the prioritization policy versus C4 zoning, which is where the trade-offs take place, is it better to work that conversation on the priority policy or actually through the zoning bylaw rewrite?
I think it's better for some of those trade-offs to live in the zoning, because the priority policy, although it is beneficial, on a project like this, it might have saved 6 months, which is normally not enough from our discussions with interested developers to push a project to do something significantly different than what the zone might allow.
So I think what Jonas is saying is that this conversation we better have under a zoning discussion versus a priority discussion, because the trade-offs are coming not because it was a priority project. The trade-offs are coming because of C4 zoning and what we're trying to fit onto each site.
But if I may, my understanding the point of this priority policy was to incentivize those incredible projects going above and beyond. And if we're sort of opening the door to projects that because of C4 or whatever are having to make all sorts of compromises, we're not achieving the goal of the priority.
So the prioritization policy is not about projects that go above and beyond. It's projects that we're proposing 100% commercial or projects that propose 100% rental.
Yeah, I meant above and beyond on the specific areas outlined in the policy. But
So
I lost my train of thought.
okay, I'm happy to put this on the agenda with our next zoning bylaw rewrite discussion at committee of the whole, and just talk about the C4 zone in relation to what we're trying to achieve through the priority process. But I think it belongs in a zoning conversation, not just the prioritization policy. That's the type of we're looking for. The issue comes for staff in what's required in the zone. And if it's just a DP, you can't, well, there's no discretion in that, Councillor Pettingill. There is potentially in rezoning, but this is a DP. So I think it belongs in a zoning conversation. And I'm happy to put it on an agenda at committee of the whole.
And I would add that sometimes variances make perfect sense. In this case, there were a few variances that were, suggested by staff or ADP, and that's pretty common. So I don't think we would want to not allow for that to happen in a priority process.
I think some of the issues come with the C4 zone as a whole, and that's a conversation that we could have, or how we bonus through density specific kinds of developments. So I think that can be part of the discussion.
That's certainly coming in the zoning bylaw update, the density bonus scheme on expanding of what we've got across, and C4 would certainly be a good candidate for it.
All right, so we've got that in the minutes. I will put that on the committee of the whole agenda when we bring back the zoning bylaw. Okay, thank you very much for your report. Did you have something else? Oh, yes.
We still need to do 3, yeah.
I'm on it.
Yeah.
That the District of Squamish give first 3 readings to the Housing Agreement Bylaw number 2717-2020, moved by Councillor Hooker, seconded by Councillor Race. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Opposed? Councillor Pettingill opposes. Motion carries. And that the Mayor and Corporate Officer be authorized to execute the development permit. Moved by Councillor French, seconded by Councillor Stoner. All those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Pettingill opposes. Motion carries. Thank you. Now we got it. Council, do you want a 5-minute break before we do this one? Yes? Okay, we'll do a 5-minute reset, please. We're back in our regular business meeting for January 21st, and we are on item 8A1. And this is a District of Squamish zoning bylaw amendment, number 2529, 2018. This is for a CD90 zone on Centennial Way. Naisby.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Elaine Naisby, and I'm a I'm a planner with Community Planning. The Centennial Way rezoning application has been under review for some time and has had previous presentations to Council. The applicant has made a number of changes in the original proposal in order to best align the mix of uses with the two parcels' mixed employment land use designation in the district's official community plan. For the benefit of members of the public in the audience or watching from home, I will review the proposal. The lands are centrally located and were previously used as and are currently zoned for campground use. The north parcel is located adjacent to the Mamquam River. There is a narrow, wooded, district-owned parcel directly adjacent to the north site to the west. The south parcel is located south of Centennial Way.
It's up there.
Yeah, I can't see that. The south parcel is located south of Centennial Way and adjacent to a portion of recently developed Seven Peaks townhomes. To the east of the south site is a hydro corridor with riparian channels, and farther east are industrial lands. Directly west of the south site is the district-owned parcel at 42,000 Loggers Lane, with tenants the Ministry of Forests, as well as the Squamish Montessori School. In the larger context, the parcels are very nearby to Brennan Park Recreation Center, and they're also in proximity to the Squamish Valley Rod and Gun Club, as well as the newly developed Mamquam River Campground. Finally, the parcels are in close proximity to Highway 99, with Centennial Way being a designated truck route. The 2040 OCP designated the land's mixed employment with consideration of its central location and the need to provide employment space and services for the anticipated residential growth in the Brennan area. I'm going to read out the definition of mixed employment. It applies to lands intended for a creative, complementary, and flexible mix of employment generating uses in transitional employment and light industrial areas. Supported uses in the mixed employment areas include civic, institutional, artisan, arts, culture, limited retail, business office, professional office, light industrial, residential mixed use, parks, and greenways. Residential only and retail only land uses are not supported under this land use designation. This image provides an overview of the land uses and the sites. And so both the north and the south sites provide a mix of land uses. In this image, purple are the employment uses, pink and yellow are residential, and green is open space. And the proposal has been divided into 3 sites. So site 1 is the north parcel, site 2 is the southern portion of the south parcel, and site 3 is the northern portion of the south parcel. So this presentation will highlight the Centennial Way proposal's primary land uses, density, and amenities. First, we'll review open space and pedestrian connections, then employment use, and then residential use. Throughout, I will identify changes that the applicant has made in response to the last council meeting, which was the October 22nd Committee of the Whole meeting. And I will summarize those changes at the end of this presentation. So the area, including the large district-owned parcel to the west, is designated as a future neighborhood node in the district's official community plan. The lands are in proximity to the district-wide corridor trail and the primary bus routes, both north and south. The proposal provides a mix of land uses that would create a walkable, bikeable community with live, work, and play elements all provided within one development. In addition to the internal paths within each development that would connect the open space and the various uses to one another, the proposal thoughtfully adds trails and path connections to the larger neighborhood. These include a new trail proposed in a utility right-of-way on the 42,000 Loggers parcel to add permeability between developments and a more direct route to Brennan Park. Connecting to this would be a north-south path on the subject parcel connecting to the north. The district's corridor trail would be extended as a paved multi-use path along Centennial Way with pedestrian and cyclist safety in mind. Upgrades to the dike area, including a dike pavilion for public use, would enhance the district's dike walking path system. Finally, the pedestrian, cyclist, and vehicle traffic would all be improved through this development with a new intersection roundabout at Centennial Way and Loggers Lane to address the currently problematic and aging intersection at that location. And the application now commits to providing the roundabout in phase 1 of the project build-out. District policy supports the creation of employment space throughout the community and within neighborhood nodes. Using this bird's eye perspective, the Centennial Way rezoning provides a mix of employment space. At the October 22nd Council Committee of the Whole meeting, the proposal offered 23.2% overall employment space. The applicant has since increased this amount to a total 28.4% employment space. The employment space consists of a full light industrial building at grade and with a full second level of mezzanine. This is highlighted on the screen in teal color. Anticipated light industrial uses are those that would add a high employment space ratio while providing accessory uses that may enhance the neighborhood node by providing day-to-day services in a walkable neighborhood such as bakery, coffee roasting, brewery, small scale, sports equipment or clothing manufacture, other uses that align with the district's Hardwired for Adventure brand. With the alcoholic beverage manufacturing use permitted, this area could have one or more microbreweries or distilleries with a restaurant that creates a walkable location for neighbors to socialize. Allowing these uses in this walkable location would help to free up space in the district's business park for more industrial uses. Office space is provided in both the north and south parcels, and it is the office use that has been recently increased in order to provide additional employment space by adding 2 floors of office space above a portion of the light industrial building. These are shown in yellow on the screen. The office space would serve small to medium scale, such as technology firms or professional offices of local companies. The commercial retail space on Site 1 would include a corner cafe with small offices such as doctor, lawyer, or sports medicine. And finally, there is a daycare space as shown on the screen. This image shows the anticipated mix of employment uses on the sites. In terms of residential diversity, this is provided with a total of 266 new residential units. 23 are affordable rental, 22 of which are rental apartments. These are secured as affordable with 12 one-bedroom, 6 two-bedroom, and 4 three-bedroom. And in addition, the applicant with this proposal provides 1 rental townhouse that is affordable. So going through the different types of residential, the blue highlighted on the screen is the 80 unit purpose-built rental apartment. The orange is the market condos, 79 units on the north site. The lighter orange color are the market townhomes on the north and south sites. And we have 3 market townhomes with lock-off suites. We also have 10 duplexes. So there's quite a range of residential diversity with this proposal. There's a range of housing types, including affordable units. The site sections show us the building massing and heights that are proposed. This one here is going through the north site, and it's showing the 3-story townhomes along the dike, as well as the 6-story mixed-use building that is north of Centennial Way. And these images also show the underground concealed parking that the change in grade allows. The second section is through the south site. In yellow, I've highlighted the additional 2 floors of office space above the light industrial building. So that's showing the light industrial with office building, the office and daycare building, as well as the 3-story townhouse building. And section 3 shows us the southern portion of site 3. We have the light industrial building to the north. We have the 5-story purpose-built rental apartment, as well as the 3-story townhomes. At the October 22nd Council Committee of the Whole meeting, the parking spaces required for the district's zoning bylaw for the Site 3 uses were being met on site. However, in order to add employment space to the neighborhood node, the addition of office space has resulted in a related increase in the number of required parking spaces for Site 3. 2 revisions are proposed to address this in the proposal's parking count. First is that the residential rental required ratio of parking to each unit be revised from the previous proposed 1.5 stalls per unit to 1.2 stalls per unit. There are precedents for purpose-built rental buildings to have lower parking counts than typically required. For example, to 1-to-1 ratio of 1 parking stall per rental unit. Second is that the provision of car share vehicles account for 5 required office stalls each. Therefore, the provision of 3 car share vehicles would reduce the office use parking requirements by 15 stalls total. With those revisions, parking needs are being met. And in the staff report to council, it was highlighted that with this proposal's central location, it is anticipated that office users would be able to access the site via alternate means of transportation. The applicant's community amenity contribution remains largely as previously presented, but with a few changes. So in response again to the council comments at Committee of the Whole, they are now providing 1 affordable rental townhouse unit to ensure housing diversity. The Loggers Lane and Centennial Way intersection upgrade has been moved to phase 1 of the project build out. And the Dyke Pavilion value has been lowered in response to comments of wanting it to have a natural look and feel, with the remaining $60,000 value previously assigned to this moved to increase the cash in lieu of active transportation and parks. This second slide shows the additional CAC. So per the district's CAC policy, the applicant is providing at the top of the screen $1,674,415 to meet our CAC policy plus 23 affordable units, the provision of those. And in addition, in recognition of the scale of this rezoning proposal, there is additional CAC that goes in above and beyond that. So in total, the CAC plus the additional CAC totals nearly $2.27 million. And this amount does include the Centennial and Loggers intersection upgrade. So project phasing, this was shown at the last council meeting, but I've highlighted that the Centennial Loggers intersection is moved to phase 1. So project phasing would see the north site, or the north half of the parcel south of Centennial Way, so site 3 developed first, then site 1, which is on the north side of Centennial, finally site 2 at the south of Centennial. So the summary of changes that the applicant has made in response to the council meeting is that the employment space on site has been increased from 23% to 28%. They will provide 3 car share vehicles, 1 affordable rental townhouse. We discussed that the Dyke Pavilion value remains, but it's been moved into the cash in lieu, with a smaller portion remaining for the Dyke Pavilion. Roundabout moved to phase 1. In response to comments related to restaurant use is permitted and has always been on the site 1 under the neighborhood commercial use. However, the there is now a condition of use in the zone that there can be an accessory restaurant use together with the alcoholic beverage manufacturing use, and it is a scaled provision, so it can be a maximum 30% the size of the alcoholic beverage manufacturing use. In response to council comments, concerns around the source of energies, the proponent now proposes that the Site 2 townhomes, all 75 of them, be electric, not gas for the energy. And also the Mampram River Access Society campground, which does not have water service as it's on the water side of the dike. The applicant proposes, if it's engineering wise possible, to extend water service along that north site to the public dike pavilion area for public use as well. There was one site planning element that was seen to be unresolved and that staff have recently worked with the applicant to resolve. The primary face of the development in proximity to Brennan Park, the southwest corner of the north site, has the mixed-use building and retail use set back from the street behind parking. Development permit area guidelines and best planning practices would have the building located adjacent to the street to create a street presence, to activate the street and draw people from Brennan Park and the corridor trail. It is challenging from the applicant's perspective to move the building due to site grading, the extent of the underground parkade, and also a hesitance to put patio space directly on Centennial Way, which is busy with truck traffic. However, the applicant has offered to work with the district to place an additional building at the corner in order to create that street presence, which addresses staff concerns. Staff will work with the applicant to ensure that a commitment for this is secured during the rezoning. The rezoning stage focuses on land use and density. If approved, the development permit is the next stage, and that is where we will look closer at detailed site design and the look and feel of the development to ensure that it meets development permit area guidelines. In terms of policy, this proposal does align with the district's neighborhood node policy, which directs the majority, it directs that it's designated as a neighborhood node, and the proposal meets that. It does have a significant variety of residential type and tenure, including purpose-built rental and affordable rental. There's mixed commercial and residential use, employment space, active transportation, and smart growth principles. The council priority areas are the planet and the environment, climate change emergency, housing affordability and diversity, the economy and local jobs, and neighborhood connectivity and public spaces. This mixed-use development incorporates employment, housing, childcare, and recreational amenities in close proximity. The housing density and mix of uses will contribute to a walkable, bikeable community and add to the need and benefit of transit services. Locating multiple uses and services in close proximity helps in reducing GHGs by reducing the need for vehicle travel. In addition, as there is a proposal for a reduced amount of office space, office parking, but there are going to be 3 car share vehicles that may help the district in a paradigm shift towards alternate modes of transportation. Okay, so the Centennial Way proposal provides a walkable mix of uses that will include substantial portion of employment space, residential with purpose-built rental, childcare, affordable housing, energy alternatives, car share, bus stop, public paths with signalized crossing across Centennial, a dike pavilion, open green space, and public art. Therefore, staff recommend the bylaw be given second reading and that a public hearing be scheduled for Tuesday, February 18th at 6 p.m. in council chambers. Prior to adoption of the bylaw, there are items to be completed. These include execution and registration of a land development agreement, Inspector of Dikes approval, Ministry of Transportation approval, and other items as are shown on the screen and were in the staff report. Also, registration of covenants on the subject lands, including covenants for flood hazard, stat right-of-way for public access, and others. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Naisby. Questions from council? Council Pecco.
On the broken record a bit again. I am really struggling here to see how this is consistent with our climate emergency, where we are talking about an absolute reduction in 10 years. That's 45% reduction in 10 years. And the proposal here is an increase. It's an increase on 2 sites instead of 3 in terms of the fuel, but it's still an increase as opposed to a reduction from where we are today. And we're talking also about a lot more embedded carbon and all of these things. So, looking at the calendar, when or how do we start dealing with this? This is a big parcel. We have a lot more levers when it's a rezoning that we don't always have with other projects. So, I guess I'm wondering why we think this makes sense in that climate emergency, why we wouldn't use those levers at this point to, tell developers, give them the reason to actually figure out how to do this and to make sure that the people moving to our community are ones that are willing, that understand the importance and want to live in a place in homes that are emission-free.
So you're asking why the other buildings have been electrified?
Yeah, and I guess how this fits with our climate policy as proposed, our climate emergency.
If I may, through you, Mayor, at the risk of again sounding like a broken record myself, I think that we are recognizing that some projects have been in the review process for a couple of years, and we're certainly pushing every project that's going through the approval process to do the best that they can, but we're also pushing on other fronts, such as rental and affordable housing, more employment space. So, we kind of land at a point where we think that the project cannot carry anymore, any more added requirements, but it is a rezoning, so it's up to council if council wants to proceed with what the proponents have told us is sort of the point above which they're not sure if the project makes any sense anymore.
Do you have a follow-up question?
Yeah, I'll see my comments, but I guess, so what, if I move to this development, say it gets built, I move to it, what percentage of my sort of weekly chores and leisure and stuff can I do on foot?
Through you, Mayor, I would say a great deal, particularly because it's so close to Brennan Park and all that Brennan Park offers. It's on the corridor trail, so it's extremely close to the Garibaldi Village shopping, and it's very easy access to downtown. Through this application, I've had local, office type businesses actually reach out and say that they would love to have office space in this location. So there's definitely an interest in this very centrally located office space.
So then a follow-up, why then would we accept, when I was looking at the parking, I think it was 2 to 3 spaces per residential unit, give or take, or a number of them had that. So if it's that walkable, why would we give up that much space for parking, and why would we have much less parking?
Through the mayor, as Mr. Velaniskis mentioned, this application has been under review for some time, and it might have been at first reading or subsequent meeting that there was concern that there was not sufficient residential parking proposed, and that concern that if there wasn't enough parking for the residents, that they might impact the surrounding neighborhood by parking vehicles elsewhere. Some of those townhome units that have 3 vehicles identified is because they're tandem units that also have a driveway in front. So, you know, I would say that the design is not just all given to parking. If it's seen that that's too much parking, then I'm sure that those garages may form space for storage or other uses. But staff feels like there's a good supply of parking based on all of the policy.
Just to add to that, I think not just in this case, but in general, applicants feel that they don't want to push the envelope on parking, and we're, you know, in the process of updating our zoning bylaw, and we will be looking at parking generally. So this proposal is trying to fit within our current requirements as much as possible.
So there's less residential parking in the rental building than what we saw at first reading. It hasn't changed for the townhomes, but you can't build on the main level anyway. If you were talking about 3 spots per unit, is that right?
Yeah, I'm still, I think, just struggling with the idea of how much employment we have in proximity to residential and tying that to the amount of parking, making sure these things all align. It feels a little bit like we have sort of somewhat isolated policies that are a little bit detached from our goals of having everyone kind of walk to everything. And I could be wrong on that, but I'm just sort of trying to explore and test those things a bit.
Councillor Anderson.
Yes, in discussing the southwest corner of Site 1, you referred to the setback of the building and that street presence might be more desirable than that setback. I'd like to, you mentioned, and I didn't quite hear clearly, that there is a new proposal for some type of building structure, and my interest is in what type. Why I'm interested is that I actually think the setback makes sense. I think that Centennial Way intersection, we may potentially see increased truck traffic in future, including heavy trucks, because there could be increased, more intensive use of industrial lands to the east, episodic use. So I think we might be looking at instead a noise barrier, which could be attractive instead. But I'm inclined to suggest that setback makes sense. But did you state that there's a proposal for a building there, a new one?
Through the mayor, this is a recent discussion, and that's why it wasn't included in the staff council report. But the applicant is amenable to providing a roughly 2,000 or so square foot building as a means of activating the street there. Yes.
If I can add, it is a neighborhood node, and this corner in this development is sort of the most front-facing. The planning practice more recently is, you know, kind of moving away from having parking lots separate buildings, and it is going to be on a corridor trail. So by putting some commercial use right at the corner, we think that it's going to improve that statement of a neighborhood node and connect it better to the pedestrians that might be arriving here from Brennan Park.
Commercial rather than residential.
Oh, absolutely.
Thank you.
Other questions? Councillor Stoner and then Councillor Rees.
In the performance package, or our package, it says that parking areas will include a provision for future electric car charging stations, or any of the charging stations. Do you be able to clarify?
They will have to be. All of the shared parking will have to have infrastructure. That's our bylaw requirement for electrification.
I think it's 30% present and 100% roughed in.
Yes.
Is what it says back. Councillor Rees.
Thank you. Now I'm intrigued by this potential new building because I can understand the rationale for it, but doesn't that throw the parking calculation farther offside?
It potentially might, and that's why we've asked the proponent to agree to having this provision in a development agreement. So we'll give the district some discretion in the development permit process whether to locate a small commercial building here or not. but as it is designed now, it would be taking away some parking.
So in terms of this bylaw, then we're going with what we have in the report now. And so the use of this would be part of a DPA that would come later if the development is approved, if it's rezoned? Would be s-
I think the question is what's coming to public hearing?
Yeah, I guess that's,
Yes, so, good question. We did ask the applicant to produce some drawings, so this is something that we raised early on, and then we sort of focused on other issues with the site planning, and we've recently come back to this point as kind of the only unresolved piece from a staff perspective. So we're hoping to have some more information for council at public hearing. But the intention is not to change the bylaw unless it's absolutely necessary, and put it as a requirement in the land development agreement to deal with it at the development permit stage.
I see your hand, Councilor Penfield. I'm just going to see if there's any questions from folks who haven't asked a question yet. No? Councilor Ford? Can I just ask, it says that half of the intersection will be done in phase 1?
Through the mayor, no, it will all be done in phase 1. The only reason that we talk about half of the intersection is in terms of the CAC value. At a previous council meeting, it was presented that half of that value be considered within the actual CAC, and that half be considered as additional CAC.
Okay. I was wondering how you build half a traffic.
Yeah,
Be challenging. For the daycare space, have we run this by Miss McJanet and all the work that she's been doing around viable daycare spaces, and is it big enough? Kind of.
through the mayor, yeah, we've definitely, asked the applicant to ensure that the outdoor space meets the licensing needs. And in a previous iteration of the proposal, the daycare was situated on Centennial Way, and staff felt that that was not the most ideal spot for the daycare outdoor space to be located. And so the applicant, in response to that, flipped it so that the daycare is more internal to the space.
I was just thinking more in terms of talking with daycare providers about whether a space for 25 children at the rents that would be required
Right.
is actually a viable operation. Has that conversation been had with Ms. McJanet? Because that's some of the feedback we're starting to hear from the daycare community, is that, well, it's great that you've got a space, but actually I would need 3 classrooms to pay the rent that would be required there. So we either have to do something to bring rents down for daycare providers, or we've got to design space that allows them to be profitable, given the age range of the kids and how many PCs they'll need. So it's a shifting world right now, but I wonder if that conversation's been had.
Through the mayor, that conversation specifically hasn't. I have talked to Ms. McJanet about that, though, on other projects. So we will talk to the applicant about this, and there is an intention to secure that space specifically through the LDA, so that's the only use that can occur in that space. So I would assume there would be some sort of a correction to ensure that it is full. But we can bring forward more information on this at public hearing.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Penfield?
I think we talked a bit about this last time this was here, but just want to understand, there is an area of this that is zoned, allows for camping. I understand it's not low-cost camping, but it is, in terms of the housing spectrum, I think suggests a lower cost. One of the benefits of this project is proximity to existing services and planned services, and so there's the potential, if we were to leave it, for affordable housing near important services. So through the CACs or some other mechanism, do we have any plan to sort of meet that same opportunity elsewhere if we give it up here?
Through the mayor, in previous visits to council, the CAC included a $350,000 value that was meant to specifically offset the loss of campground use. That value was arrived at because of an engineering cost estimate to provide water service to support an already existing low amenity campground, the Mamcram River Access Campground. Due to challenges with providing water service there, the applicant maintains that $350,000 value in the CAC. However, it's been moved into the critical amenities cash so that council can direct where that money would go.
So I take it then, though, we don't have a plan to have sort of a similar level of affordable housing in proximity to services, and like $350,000 isn't going to do it. So we are sort of, one of the things we are doing for this is giving up that.
We are giving up campground space if we rezone this. Do you have anything to add?
No, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? The allowable uses when allowed fast food.
Through the mayor, I would have to look at the zoning bylaw to see where we allow fast food, but I'm quite sure that
Just
it's...
those restaurant uses or any cafe uses wouldn't include fast food. I don't think that is what goes in a neighborhood node.
I believe we have a standalone fast food use in our zoning bylaw, and when you do, it's not permitted by default in other zones.
Okay. I am intrigued by that little building that would sort of, I do believe this is a gateway, and part of it's industrial and part of it is now residential and services, so I'm interested to see what comes back there. It'd be nice not to just be greeted with a parking lot at that corner. Maybe an ice cream store, that is a crepe store in the winter. Anyway, I don't have any more questions. Anybody else? Okay. So we have some motions in front of us. Councilor Race?
Yeah, I'll move the recommendation.
Second by Councilor French, and you can speak to it, Councilor Race.
Thank you. And this is, of course, second reading. For me, not approval of the project generally, but from my perspective, the changes from the last meeting we've had that were highlighted by staff are generally positive, and so I now think it's in the form that we can take to public hearing and look for public comment. So I'm supporting second reading on that basis.
Councilor French?
I think that we have a patient and responsive developer on this project. This is a project we've been hearing about for a long time, and has evolved over the period of time. And it ticks a lot of boxes for me. Centennial Way and Loggers Lane intersection improvement that I think is very much needed. It's close to existing recreation facilities, childcare facility that's also needed. I like the public art component that's talked about, and we're getting diverse housing, not just in form, but also affordability and varied employment space. So I'm keen to hear community feedback when this goes to third reading, and looking forward to getting the details of this mystery building as well. So I'm supportive.
Thank you. Councilor Pangill?
I think I will not support this, just considering whether or not whether I would support it and then give the feedback and look for changes at third reading. But I think it's important to make a statement at this point with a vote in opposition. And I would hope to actually change my vote at third reading if we saw some of the fossil fuel infrastructure issues addressed in particular. That might be enough to get me over the threshold. But watching Australia, looking at the calendar, we have 10 years to reduce from where we are today. And so for that reason, I will vote against this as proposed. That, you know, we have tools right now to do something about it. I understand we want to be careful about changing goalposts and all that kind of thing, but we are in an emergency, and that means we all have to kind of do things significantly differently and quite quickly. So I will be withholding my support at this point, and we'll look for some creative solutions so that I can support it at third reading.
Thank you. Any other comments? I don't disagree with my colleague, Councillor Pettengill. I think that everybody should be sharpening their pencils and trying to figure out how they can do more with regard to mitigating greenhouse gases. I do think that this proposal now satisfies enough of my concerns that it can go to public hearing. And I appreciate many of the changes that were made from first reading to today, just to ensure that sort of vibrancy and walkability. And I like having another car share unit of 3 cars in that area. So, any other comments? Call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Pettengill opposes. Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so next up, we need to cancel the public hearing date that was declared for Wilson Crescent development, number 2588, 2018. That was scheduled for January 28th, and we will cancel that. Moved by Councillor Ray, second by Councillor Herford. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Phoenix Park Sea Dyke Consulting Services Contractor Work. Ms. Wilson.
Good evening, Council. Just 1 second, please.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is David Rolston. I'm the Manager of Municipal Infrastructure for the District of Squamish. Here today to recommend award of a consulting services contract for the Hunaic Park Sea Dyke. So back in November of 2019, staff presented to Council providing background information on the park, an overview of potential design options for the sea dyke, including considerations and challenges. We described some habitat opportunities as well as water access options in concert with this project. And at that time, Council supported moving forward with a sheet pile type of dike following along the average high water mark, and also to continue engaging with the community and Squamish Nation and to investigate and incorporate marine habitat improvements and water access as part of this project. Following that council meeting, staff prepared a request for proposals for consulting services to complete the design as well as construction inspection to build 200 meters of new sea dike, including a new water access at Hunaic Park. We received 4 proposals from multidisciplinary teams, including engineers and landscape architects. A team of 3 staff evaluated the proposals and recommend award to SNC Lavalin. They're considered to provide the greatest overall value based on a combination of qualifications, experience, their work plan, innovation, and their price. In addition to that, staff have submitted 2 grant applications for this project. The first is the Investing in Canada Rural and Northern Communities Fund, which funds up to 90% of project costs. So for this project, the estimate is about $5 million. So that grant would fund up to $4,050,000. The second grant application is the UBCM Structural Flood Mitigation Program, which funds up to 100% of project costs up to a maximum of $750,000. And the district needs to include a council resolution in order to support that second grant application, so I'll be seeking that tonight. So the recommendations are that the District of Squamish award the consulting services contract for Rene Park Sea Dike to SNC Lavalin, that the mayor and corporate officer be authorized to execute the consulting services agreement, and that the District of Squamish supports the submission of an application to the 2019 Structural Flood Mitigation Funding Stream and agrees to provide overall grant management.
Thanks. Questions? I will come right up this side. Raise, Pettingill, and then Hereford.
Thank you.
And over to this side. Thank you.
Could you go to one of the overhead slides, please? I guess my question is more around the scope of this, and to what extent does the design go into what I'll call the usable facility space, I think, the yellow space, or if at all? And does it close down any options for the future, or do we have all options? There's been all kinds of different things kicked around, and I'm just curious about that.
Through the mayor. So that is to be determined through this detailed design process. We've included in the terms of our terms of reference and request for proposals that we want to ensure that this design preserves the flexibility for future options to the greatest extent possible. But we will be developing the design considering future options for the park, both the land and the water, and looking to preserve that flexibility. And this will be an iterative process where there will be community engagement, including providing a design check-in with council as the design progresses to make sure that we're following along with council's vision for the park.
And I forgot if I knew it before, but what is the timeline approximately for this?
We're seeking to begin construction during this year's fish window, which begins in August and extends to January. That may be optimistic, but that's what we're targeting.
Councilor Pettingill?
So I don't know. I love the snow. So maybe something else is making me grumpy, but I feel grumpy with this agenda. I'm challenging a lot of things.
It's not your night, is it, Councilor?
So
The snow's melting, that's
yeah.
right.
SNC Lavalin has been in the news a lot, and so it made me wonder, do we have the equivalent of a criminal records check for businesses as part of our RFP process?
No, that sort of process doesn't exist. So we don't do that. There is no process to follow. You can't do a criminal records check on a corporate entity. So you're relying on the news, which is sporadic at best. And we're dealing with a company that has global reach, but we're dealing with staff in the Vancouver office. So it's very difficult to, quote, I will say, blacklist agencies and companies that you want to work with. There's lots of legal precedent, as Councillor Race may have some background on. Lots of legal background on when you can and cannot blacklist companies, and we are far from being at that point with SNC Lavalin.
So, yeah, and I wasn't suggesting necessarily that we blacklist anyone, but when we become aware there has been challenges, and just looking at the recent news, I think it's the CEO sort of said, yeah, we did bad stuff, but we're better now, so we don't really think we deserve consequences for it, which just makes me nervous about will they follow processes and so on, and so just when we become aware, do we build that into our process, like any sort of extra oversight or extra auditing or checks and balances, just to protect our interests when we are aware there has been, I believe, even some convictions now as of December and that sort of thing?
Our oversight over our capital projects is robust enough that we don't need to do anything different. And I caution us against using the news cycle as a means of filtering our consultant base. It's very selective about what they do pick up and what they don't pick up, and we engage a lot of consultants, and whether or not they make the news is not a good way to filter our selection process.
I don't want to get too far down the rabbit hole.
I think.
Have your questions been satisfied?
Yes.
Councilor Hereford.
Thank you. I'll switch to a happier subject of potentially being successful with all these grants. Are they stackable? Like would the UBCM grant effectively cover off the vast majority of sort of what the other one doesn't? That's the concept, or is it?
So through the mayor, each grant is different. In the case of these two grants, they are stackable. So they say that a second grant could top up the recipient's portion of funding.
Thank you.
Councillor Anderson?
I wonder if we might be able to refer to the design considerations objectives slide.
Sorry, was this from? This was from a previous. I don't know if I have that. That was in a previous. Actually, I might have it from my.
Well, last time there is an indentation on the shoreline, and last time I made reference to it, and I made a mistake. It's actually not the former mouth of the Catamol Slough. It's the former mouth of the slough we today call the Bridge Pond. It used to enter or come out to the channel here, and that's why we have that indentation. Now, on this slide that I've referred to, there's a statement: a straight dike alignment is preferred, and that's understandable for cost. But we also have consideration of maintaining flexibility for future use. It is going to be, and we hope it will be, a busy place for paddlers and for community use, and it's also a windy site. And so the issue is whether that indentation might be useful in future for paddlers, in particular, some shelter. My question is, in the public engagement process, can that topic of whether or not to preserve that indentation in the shoreline be on the table? That is, that we can allow and encourage paddlers, the paddling club, to comment on this and give their perspectives.
Through the mayor, yes, we can do that. This review, design considerations, this was done by me in the absence of detailed engineering and having structural engineers and geotechnical engineers. But we can certainly look into that option in the detailed design stage and get a better understanding of what costs or constructability implications there may be.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor French?
I wonder if you might talk a little bit about timelines associated with the grants. Are we expecting to hear back soon, or are these long-term decisions?
Through the mayor, we do hope to hear back soon. The grant applications were submitted some time ago, and I believe they indicated that there would be formal announcements early in 2020.
Follow-up, and the implications if we do not get either of these grants, what does that do to the funding?
If we don't receive, through the mayor, if we don't receive any grants, we would be looking to phase construction of this in some manner. So that could entail putting sheet piles in 2020 and backfilling and completing construction in 2021. It's not ideal, but we would potentially look at something like that. The other option too is that if there's new funding in 2021, we could have construction span. If it started late in 2020, it could span over into the 2021 year, and we could stack the municipal budgets from 2020 to 2021.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Was it a question or were you moving?
No, question.
Councillor Race?
I had to move to make a question. So, but the scope once again, so we're talking about possible water structures as well. I take it, docks, and there's a picture of a little building floating there and so forth. And that's part of the scope of this. So that's another phase.
Through the mayor, so we have requested a water access. We have not specified what that needs to look like. And in some of the proposals, there were creative ideas, including access to the existing beach. So it may not necessarily entail a structure out into the water. I think that is a likely outcome, but I don't want to make any assumptions at this point in the design.
Thank you.
Councillor Stoner?
I was going to move the staff recommendation.
Seconded by Councillor Anderson. Any further discussion? Okay, yeah.
I will support this because it seems like this is consistent with our policy, but I think, I understand we're also looking at the procurement policy, and I do think some of the issues that I raised are things we need to be thinking about. We're looking at using our procurement policy to drive some of the climate change we need to do, and I think making sure that companies feel supported in playing by the rules and so on and getting that sort of thing is important, but I believe in the procurement policy will be the place to address that, and so that's why I will be supporting this.
I'm looking forward to seeing this work move forward and the design pieces in our communication on it.
All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Next up is the perpetually affordable housing policy and housing. Mr. Buck.
Thank you, Member of Council.
Okay.
Okay. So, tonight, 2.5 items to deal with tonight related to the perpetually affordable housing policy. A minor amendment to the sort of subsequent amendment to the community amenity contribution policy that sort of stems out of the first one, and then acceptance of a housing governance RFP. Are my objectives tonight? Previously, the affordable housing policy has been in front of Council in June and September, the last time of which you asked me to go back and do further consultation on the policy with the community and non-profit housing sector. The governance RFP has been, frankly, a little while coming back. It was over a year ago that you asked me to come back with suggestions on the longer term process to fulfill the governance model work. So just a little bit of background then, in terms of the housing continuum, this is in our housing strategy. This provides sort of a spectrum of the full range of housing that's available, from market housing right through to emergency and transitional shelters. The portion of the housing spectrum that we're looking to cover with the perpetually affordable housing policy is really actually the middle two part of these four columns. It's really around the affordable rental housing and market rental housing. Our direct activities are the four columns from affordable ownership to independent social housing, but really the perpetually affordable housing is sort of this middle part of that box on the spectrum. This is just another way of showing the spectrum in a sort of a circular or wheel fashion, and again the perpetually affordable housing policy is really focused in on this subsidised rental housing. So again, background to give you a bit of sort of grounding on the PAH policy. We want to create a local definition for affordable housing, establish rental limits and thresholds, define eligibility requirements, talk about a waitlist management system, and determine generally how the PAH units and assets will be sustainably managed. The affordability definition uses the CMHC guideline that we should be spending no more than 30% of our before-tax income on housing. It's looking to target folks that earn a maximum income of 80% of the median income for renters, and for affordable units for sale at a later point in time, not at that point right now, we'd be looking at anywhere between 80 and 120 of median incomes. The policy also allows for affordability to be defined differently when we're using or working with other levels of governments and funding programs, and Buckley being the paradigm example of that, is we've got folks at far lower levels than 80% of median income or 10 or 20% below market rents, because we've got funding from other programs. So the policy has that flexibility. So is the policy intended to address or deal with truly significant levels of affordability? No, it never was. That's not part of our strategy. It really is looking at the modest market part of the spectrum. These PAH projects always have been and always have been intended to be financially self-sufficient. They aren't deep subsidy, they aren't emergency housing, they aren't subsidised housing in the typical sense of the word. There's no there's no program money to put into this, there's no program supports. These things, quote, have to float on their own. So median rental rates need to be no more than 90% of median rents for district projects. For private developments, that's 80%. So we're using two metrics. It's the lower of, and that's under section 2.1, it's the lower of either the rent limit or the median income limit. So whichever gets us to the lowest affordability level. I say this allowance for more affordability when cooperating with others, and occupancy and size standards are based either on CMHC, not CMCH, which is an entirely different organisation, and BC Housing Information. So we're using other folks' thresholds and standards for occupancy and sizing. Eligibility, assets, eligible residents may not own real estate. These are the eligibility requirements in basic form. You will need to work in the district a minimum of 20 hours per week. Must have lived in the district for a year, so we're establishing local employment, local residency as a means to get in. And then earn no more than these income requirements, which again these are census based. So this year it's 71,000 for 2 or more person household, down to 34,000 for the 1 person households. The minimum income we have eliminated from the policy. I'll come back to that later. So since you last saw it, I've undertaken further consultation with Squamish Integrated Housing Solutions Group and the development industry. We have an informal group that meets. In terms of the non-profit housing providers locally, I'm going to step out and say there's general agreement with the contents of the perpetually affordable housing policy. Where there is not agreement, where there remains sort of a bit of a divide is really with the housing strategy, where it says we directly support for low to modest incomes that can self-support financially, and we independently or indirectly support subsidised housing and emergency housing. So if we are operating or getting PAH units through community money contributions, or we're designing, they need to be financially self-sufficient. Where we'll indirectly do is under one roof. The seniors projects, we will provide land, provide DCC credits, so indirectly support, but we're not going to get directly involved in housing projects that have and require ongoing financial subsidies. We can't resolve that issue in the PAH policy. It's a strategy issue. It would mean essentially walking back the strategy and a number of decisions that we've taken since 2019. But I think in general, the non-profit housing group is okay with the policy as it sits in front of council tonight. In terms of the substantive changes that we've made to the policy, there are changes to the purpose section to essentially outline that we're trying to accommodate the broadest, most representative cross-section of the community. I'm going to quickly skip through these. They're all highlighted. The changes are tracked in multiple colours. It was done multiple times, so you can find them. Section 1.1 removed an income maximum. It just didn't read well. It was sort of inconsistent with the remainder of the policy. Section 1.3 is clarification with non-profit, when we're working with non-profit operators, that the income and rent requirements can be established with that non-profit operator. Again, we can go much lower for more flexibility, more affordability. Section 1.5, utility costs. It's clear that utility costs are included. There's a similar change in attachment 1 to the policy to reflect that. Section 1.6 is again, it's a reiteration almost of section 1.3 that, again, we're working with non-profit operators that we can specify specific target, quote, target markets. So if we want to specify that they need to go to a certain subsector of affordability, we can do that and work with the non-profit in doing that. In section 2.1, there's clarification that those are maximum rental rates, not target rental rates. Section 2.2, there was a comment that the CMHC metric that we use is rather selective and doesn't draw from a large number of units across the community. And it's true, the CMHC data is not the best that we would ever hope for, but it's the only data that we have that's replicable and is objective and we can all agree on. So having said that, section 2.2 allows for council, if we find a better metric or someone proposes a better metric, we can look at that and maybe consider using that in odd circumstances. Section 2.4 allows for more flexibility in having more affordable rents when we're partnering. Section 3.4 increases the cash asset limitation from 100,000 to 225,000. The 100,000 was sort of an arbitrary number. 225 is a rough approximation that I've done with a mortgage broker. That allows, if you have that amount of money in cash, that will get you a down payment such that the minimum income can afford to purchase a market unit in the community. So there is some rationale around moving that from the previously hand-picked number to that will essentially allow the lowest income bracket in the community to afford a market unit if you've got that amount in cash sitting for a down payment. So. Section 3.10, there was some question here about whether or not, how do we deal with tenants that move into PH units and then subsequently become ineligible, the income increases. It had previously read 2 months and you have to be out. We've allowed here for a range between 2 to 6 months to allow a greater flexibility for them to find alternate accommodations rather than just 2 months and it's done. Section 5, that's clarification that access to PAH units when they come as amenity. The district or an operator through an operating agreement, we're only having one single head lease. So if we've got 10 units, we're not having 10 separate leases with individual owners. That's an administrative nightmare. There would be one head lease with the owner, and then the operator would have subleases to the occupants. Section 6.4, this came up both, I believe, from council and from the non-profit group. There's some flexibility to allow an operator to place people from the waitlist using its own priority system, not first on, first off. It's first on, but off based on need. Section 6.5 is amended to provide annual reports on tenant makeup from operators, so we know who's in those units, so we can better determine if we are meeting our targets from demographic makeup. Section 7 requires a review of tenant demographic makeup no less than every 2 years, again going back to make sure we are meeting our objectives. Item 4, under procedures, requires consultation with non-profit housing agencies when developing housing agreements, so that we're getting to that earlier in the process than we currently are right now. Item 8 is added in the procedures to allow for additional review of eligibility for self-employed applicants. That came out of council's comments at the last time. And attachment 1 is amended to remove maximum income limits and minimum rental limits. I've taken those out at the request of the non-profit housing providers, but frankly, given that we aren't putting operational money into these, they really aren't going to go away. There's only so far that we can push stuff down. However, those are removed. It doesn't, in my opinion, doesn't substantively alter the policy. So that's the summary. Now the item 4, requires consultation with non-profit houses when developing housing agreements. That led to this early and ongoing engagement change to the procedures section of the CAC policy, which is essentially the same issue. is that staff shall ensure that local non-profit housing societies and organisations are consulted when we're negotiating the CAC. So again, we're not doing it at the last point in the process. We're doing consultation with our non-profit housing societies either at the CAC negotiation process or at the housing agreement process. We're just moving that discussion about their needs much further back into the process, so that if they want or have interest in CAC units, we're getting that at the very start of the process, not at the end of the process. So, maybe we should deal with those issues with respect to the PAH policy and the CAC policy before we get into the RFP.
Okay, questions? Really? First? Go ahead.
I don't have to go first. So a lot of the numbers we're looking at, like median income and market rentals and stuff, they speak to the data source, but they're all jurisdictionally based. So you could look at a Canada-wide number, a BC number, Lower Mainland, Squamish. Unless I missed it, it wasn't clear to me what jurisdiction we're talking about when we're talking about a median. Like, is it Squamish median? Is it BC median?
Squamish. The CMHC stats that are cited are Squamish based.
And is it the same for market, like housing price rates and rental rates? Those are all Squamish based numbers?
Well, the only, it would be the, under 2.2, the CMHC annual rental market surveys, those are Squamish numbers. That's the only. The income data is census driven.
So, and just to clarify, like I believe CMHC has data for the whole province, and they may be able to provide Squamish specific data. So I wasn't clear which subset of their
Squamish data.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do we need, or is it worth mentioning that explicitly so we don't get in debates with people about which numbers we're using?
We can certainly add that. Yeah, that's not a major issue in terms of amending it.
Clarification related things again. I'm wondering the way it's written about consulting with housing non-for-profits. If we change things as it stands, what would stop just any group of people from forming what they call a not-for-profit housing society and demanding consultation? Like, I guess I'm wondering, because there are sort of known groups involved, like should we sort of articulate the specific groups we're talking about, or a committee and then we decide the members, or is this not really concerning?
No, I wouldn't recommend citing the group that I'm currently dealing with, because they just changed their name yesterday. So, and if someone's going to go to the effort of setting up a society for the purpose of getting consultation, good luck to them, because it's a lot of work. So I'm not particularly worried that there's going to be any consultation over who we'll be consulting with. There are 3 or 4 folks that we'll consult with. And we have an ongoing sort of ad hoc informal committee. So.
Do you have more questions?
Just one more.
Yep.
So 1.1 and 1.2 in the policy, and I sort of through your description, I understand the numbers a bit better, but I was curious, like, we do sometimes seem to have an upper limit and then other times just an upper and lower limit, and in 1.2 it talks about 30% before tax income for households with a range of 80 and 120% of the median, which is, now I understand, the same as saying 24% to 36% of the median. And so, I'm wondering why there's these 2 layers of numbers, and why sometimes there's an upper threshold and sometimes just an upper and a lower. And
yeah, you can't combine those numbers. They aren't sort of associative. Is that the right?
You can make up words. It's getting late. You can make up words if you want.
Well, I'm trying to remember my grade 11 math from the 1970s. 30% is the ratio of your income that you spend on housing. The 80 to 120% is your income in relation to others. You can't factor those together numerically to get a different percentage. They're entirely different numbers.
You may have just issued a challenge somehow. I feel like at the next meeting we're going to be having a math lesson.
After this committee.
I would caution about driving those numbers so low that we end up having to put, if we allow in very low incomes, then there will need to be operational monthly subsidies to make the project float. So I would caution against using them and manipulating them in that manner to get very low incomes. Of course, there is no money coming into this.
Oh, and that's not my goal. What I'm trying to think of is if I'm someone that desperately need or want housing here, and I look at this policy to understand how can I qualify or do I qualify, can I sort of wade through these numbers? And for rental, there's a 30% of before tax, but to buy something, it's 30% of 80 to 120% of the median income, and so there's an upper and a lower limit. But for rental, there's not both limits, so I don't.
Well, to be honest, if as an individual, this isn't intended to be a public piece for that regard. If we're going to do that, what we should do is pull attachment 1 and section 3.4, because the eligibility requirements are in 2 sections. For personal eligibility requirements are in those 2 sections. I wouldn't want people to have to read this policy to find out if they're eligible. We can do a separate communication piece.
Okay, but so set that aside. Just why is there an upper? It seems an upper and lower limit for a mortgage, but for rental, there's just an upper qualification, and I don't really have a sense that one's right or one's wrong. I'm just not clear why it's different.
Well, there is an upper limit because that's contained in attachment 1. Maximum income requirements for a 2-person household, maximum income requirements for a 1-person household.
So the rental piece is elsewhere, and the purchase piece is here in 1.2.
Well, the purchase piece is really just, it's a placeholder. We don't, if we're talking about, this is really around the rental thing right now. That's simply a placeholder for at some point in the future we will get into an ownership thing, but there's really not a lot of detail in here with respect to ownership, because we're not ready for that. It's simply putting something in the policy so that it's ready for that at that point in time.
Thank you. I appreciate the context piece and reminding us that council decisions to date have really been focused on the federal affordable housing policy, focusing on that middle component of the housing spectrum. And as I read through some of the proposed changes and a lot of the language that's been added, it actually confused me a little bit more in terms of feeling like it was a lot more language that shifted us towards potential inclusion of more heavily subsidized housing. And to me, that challenges me a little bit. I don't think that's where we actually want our perpetual affordable housing policy to go at this point. I would be nervous if the district was aiming to potentially long-term subsidized housing units, and so I'm just curious about the inclusion of that additional language, especially in the purpose section that specifically states around the long-term intent of the perpetual affordable housing units will be occupied by a demographic cross-section of the population that proportionally reflects areas of need in the community and factors in the level of social and program supports available in the perpetual affordable housing units. To me, that is, the language in there to me speaks much more heavily to subsidized housing, and I'm just curious about including that language.
Yes, that change to the purpose section came out of the conversation with council last time. The changes to the sections, sort of the policy sections within the document, are really intended to sort of reassure the non-profit housing operators that there's somewhere in this policy for them to potentially get involved. The policy doesn't, it allows us to go there, it doesn't require us to go there, it provides some flexibility. But the default position is still, you're going to have to meet these income requirements. It really is for, is it 10 or 20% below the market rent or 80% of median incomes? the fundamental essence of the policy hasn't changed, but those sections provide some flexibility. That was really to get the non-profit housing support, that there was something in this policy that they could perhaps get their teeth into.
Okay, and then I have another question in terms of, as I was thinking through this, and we were setting the maximum rental limits are based on 30% of median income, but we're securing housing units through the CAC policy mostly at 80% of market. And there's a discrepancy between the maximum rental limit and 80% of market. So I'm curious how we then still address that gap of cost where we're securing the units at potentially a higher price than what we're setting our maximum income.
So that gap would need to get closed on a project by project basis through the housing agreement. So that issue would be addressed at that point in time. Yeah, everything here is going to require a housing agreement bylaw, and the partnering agreement which we're working on with Cedar Sky. That's the default position for these projects to go. But everything needs a housing agreement, so that issue gets the checkbox in the housing agreement.
Councillor Anderson?
There's some very impressive detailed work here. I wondered if I could ask a question that arises out of this policy, and this is regarding organizations who are going to be consulted. In the Appendix D particulars, there's a sentence here: the district's desire is to seek to create a client-centered agency. And those agencies that are part of the group that have worked together to produce these policies is the House on Women's Centre, the Community Services Society, Helping Hands, and Cedar Citizens. I sat on a committee for about 4 years with these groups, but our committee, the Housing Options Group, was also complemented by people from the realty community, from the construction industry, real estate financing, in other words, the developer community. So my question is, where, as we look at our 3 pillars or our strategy, what is the venue for input from those other types of stakeholders, the private sector, if you like? Should they have a role here in advising on these policies? That is, it seems the direction we're going is to formalize a so-called client-centered agency, those client-based organizations. But there's other parts of the housing production, the housing industry. What is their role in our strategy as far as a formalized place where they can provide input and sit on the committee, be appointed for the expertise that they have? I hope I'm...
To what end? What exactly is this?
My experience during those 4 years, and it was shared by all of us, we came out with the recommendation that those other sectors should be represented on a proposed affordable housing working group for Squamish. And the reason is because we kept going back to them for their expertise. Pilot projects, they were all interested in pilot projects. They had experience in how you produce housing, the advantages of different technologies to deploy in affordable housing. Councillor Herford and I went on a tour, each a separate tour during the UBCM, just for an example, where we looked at some projects in Lower Mainland. Well, when we came back to the trade show and I talked to the developer who actually built those houses, he says, I wish they would talk to us because we could tell them a lot about how to do it better next time, but we're not being asked. We hope we will be asked, but we're not being asked.
Okay,
So that's my question. The private sector, the industry sector, where is their voice here?
In this policy or in work going forward? I'm not quite sure.
Maybe that's why I referred to the 3 pillars. Where in the 3 pillars? Is it Squamish Housing Organization? Is it the Comprehensive Affordable Housing Pillar? Where is the place for those that other private sector input?
Well, this policy, the PAH policy, we've discussed at the Development Liaison Committee meeting. Some of them are even here tonight. In terms of an ongoing engagement, the governance entity or agency that we form should be tasked with that role. I'm not sure that there's anything left in terms of the PAH policy or the CAC policy for further engagement at that point, but in terms of more future oriented, that we should task to the agency or entity that comes out of this governance RFP.
Right, okay.
So am I even close on this one, Ken?
I think you are, Gary, in your just the suggestion you've made that there's a governance entity. My concern is that there's a lot of private sector expertise that would be willing to come forward. It's valuable, and that I would like to see a place. I hope I can see a place for that input in the structures and programs that we produce going forward.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I am going to put a pause on this conversation. I'm actually a little bit regretting that I didn't put it on a committee of the whole, because the conversation is quite lengthy, which is not usually what we want to do to a regular business meeting. But what I want to do actually is put Ms. Bloom out of her misery and let her go home. So I'm going to ask Gary to step aside for a moment, and we're going to do this very quick item called the UBCM 2020 Age Friendly Community Grant, and let our Director of Library Services go home.
Dinner? Thanks. Good evening. I don't even have a PowerPoint.
That's okay, we won't show it.
All right, my name is Hilary Bloom. I'm the Director of Library Services at the Squamish Public Library. I'm here to speak about the Union of BC Municipalities 2020 Age Friendly Communities Program Grant Opportunity, and I'm recommending an endorsement from Council for our application. This is a grant of up to $15,000 to be used for age-friendly projects in BC communities, which can include allowing seniors and elders to age in place. The proposed project will establish a library delivery service to homebound community members, including the delivery of library materials, print, large print materials, audiobooks, ebooks, technical assistance, all through way of friendly visits to individuals' homes. The goal of the program is to engage directly with seniors and elders on a regular basis, thereby maintaining social connections, reducing isolation, and it will reach currently underserved populations. It will also help to support and increase digital literacy through technological assistance and engage volunteers in meaningful work, because the program will be carried out in day-to-day by volunteers. We have confirmed support from Better at Home, the Squamish Valley Elders Coordinator of Squamish Nation, and other municipal departments are aware and are supportive, for example, recreation services. This application supports community council and library priorities, specifically within the OCP, to expand and enhance recreational access and amenities, as well as within the accessible and age-friendly objectives. It addresses the council priority of neighborhood connectivity, and it also meets a library focus area of engaging and welcoming everyone, which includes vulnerable populations, older adults, and closer connections with Squamish Nation. Thank you.
All right, so Ms. Bloom's looking for a letter of, or an endorsement. Do you need a letter of support?
No.
Just an endorsement. So a motion.
A motion,
That council
please.
endorses the UBCM 2020 Age Friendly Community Grant. Moved by Councillor Stoner, seconded by Councillor Rickford. All those in favor? All those, motion carries. Thank you for waiting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Mr. Buxton, we're back to talking about.
That's how you do it, Gary. So,
Thank you.
Where were we? So you finished answering Councilor Anderson's question about private developer input and others. Other questions? I have a few. Okay. My one overarching question is, you started your presentation saying this is the part of the spectrum that we are going to operate in for perpetual affordable housing, and that's been the place that we've targeted from the beginning of the Housing Task Force, which is my involvement. I realize it can go back a little bit further than that. But then we talk about providing wording in this policy to allow for the deeply subsidized work. And do we need to capture it in this policy, or do we just do that on a project by project basis? Because it falls outside of this, of what we're targeting. So I'm just trying to reconcile where we have a conflict here, or we're trying to do too much with one policy.
We're doing a lot with one policy, I'll admit that. We could pare it back to be more focused. This has, in terms of the consultation that I've just gone through, it got buy-in. The sense was that there was, from the non-profit sector, was that there was nothing in this policy for them, and that the CAC units would just not be of any use to them at all. So that was there a way for them to have potential access to those? And the way I've crafted it is it's less focused, but it allows the potential for that to be realised if they bring programs and supports to the table. So it's less focused but more inclusive. So can we go back to being more focused? Yes.
The other potential conflict, I don't know if you consulted with the federal government on the words adequately consulted, but those have been problematic for them, and I wonder if we're defining that anywhere, because this is the potential conflict I see, is that this policy was to target that market sort of rental range. What our nonprofits need is more deeply subsidized units. And so by adding this statement around we'll adequately consult before we do any housing agreement, we're basically saying that most of these units should be targeting that lower end, or possibly opening the door to that. And so I'm just trying to reconcile the direction of council. It's always been to focus there and facilitate below that. But this adequately consult as a process confuses me.
This was intended to really, if we're going to consult with the non-profit sector, it really needs to be at the stage that we saw the project earlier this evening. Because once we move further and further down that line through rezoning to development permit, it gets a lot more difficult to negotiate something different with the developer. If we're going to include the non-profits in any form, it really does need to be back at this first stage so that we can make some decisions back. And the difficulty that they're going to have is, frankly, I don't think it's going to make a lot of difference in how the policy is administered, because the timing is driven by the development industry. So we get an application, we go talk to the Squamish Integrated Housing Group, it's now. You need to have program dollars and support programs in place now because the development's coming. If you don't, we move on. So if they're not ready at that point to add subsidy or program supports, it comes to us in the typical sense. So, and I suspect that's going to happen most of the time, because they generally don't have a lot of money sitting around to subsidise new projects. It's going to take them some time, and time is what you don't have when you're dealing with rezoning applications and DPs. So
Can you put the diagram of our housing spectrum up again?
that one?
I like the pie charts a little bit easier
Okay.
with the outline of where we're targeting. If you click one more time, then the
Oh.
little red box.
Yes, there we go.
Hi, thank you. So we're looking at rental housing, subsidized rental housing, and we sort of border, I think, on their territory with long-term supportive housing. So is this policy just for that little bit of long-term supportive housing? Like, that's what we're trying to open the door to with the changes you're proposing?
Yes.
And would the developer have some say in that negotiation? Because if they're targeting a certain demographic with their model, do they get a say in who's part of the building in terms of long-term support? Or are we going to just say, we get to decide who these go to?
Well, it would be a negotiation. It's not a demand because it's a CHC. So I suspect if it's short-term supportive or emergency shelter, that's going to be very difficult for them to process and deal with in a market rental or a market project.
So would we tighten up this adequately consult around any opportunities where units could be made long-term supportive housing? Or does it need to cover subsidized rental housing and rental housing? Like, are they trying to come across all of these different areas? Do they want to play in all of these areas? I'm just trying to understand what we're opening the door to.
I think we're opening the door to allow them the opportunity to maybe claim some of these units if they can get their game on and bring the program supports and the financial subsidies in relatively short order, and we can negotiate that with the developer. It's an opportunity. It's a tall order, and it's going to be very difficult to do in many cases.
So, I'll come back to you. Wouldn't better wording be that nonprofit housing societies and organizations are provided the opportunity to understand upcoming housing agreement opportunities rather than adequately to themselves? That's just a wording change. Two hands. I saw one on each side. Councillor Stone and then Councillor Craigmile and then Councillor Rees.
So just a point of clarification there. Through our current CAC policy, say we receive 10 units of affordable housing and they are given to the district. Does that preclude us from, say, one of the nonprofits coming forward and saying, hey, we have some additional funding from BC Housing or whoever, a senior level of government, we would like to operate those with this additional funding? Are they precluded from doing that at this point?
Only in the sense that we then wouldn't be, without some of these modifications, they wouldn't be meeting the income levels. They'd be way below those income thresholds, and they wouldn't meet the eligibility thresholds. So,
Councillor Pettengill and Councillor Rees.
So if we set aside the not-for-profits for a second, we'll have a policy, we start to build an inventory of housing that meets our target sector, and it'll be administered by our housing authority, and we'll see that, that proposal is in a little while. Does it make sense then, sort of within that inventory, for the not-for-profits to come to us then and say, hey, we have an opportunity, we think there's some room in your inventory, can we have a piece of your inventory? And at that time, it's a discussion. Does it make sense to take some of this inventory at this level and put it into a deeper, more subsidized, and sort of leave them separate from this thing? Or once once this policy and our housing authorities is going, those rental units are kind of stuck there and we couldn't kind of adjust the mix.
It would be possible to do what you've suggested, other than if they're in part of a partner agreement, that we're then talking with our partner about whether or not those units can be moved from this target market to a more deeply subsidised target market. That opportunity would always be available. And I guess it would be no matter what the policy says. It's just, the sense was that the policy has been amended to provide that, overtly provide that flexibility, so it's clear to everyone that that's a potential. If it's not there, I say the sense was that from the non-profit sector, and I say maybe I shouldn't speak for them, was that there was nothing in it. What's in it for me? There's nothing in this for me. There's nothing in it that speaks to the target market that I provide services to. So it was say an attempt to sort of show them where it could provide them. It could, not would, where it could provide them something.
Just to clarify, which part of the spectrum were they talking about?
Potentially any part of the spectrum.
Councillor Herford.
Thank you.
No, Councillor Stoner. Then Councillor Herford. Oh no, sorry. It went like that.
That's
I'm up.
Yeah.
Could you go back to the pie chart? To confess, it's taking me a little bit of time to get my head around this. So we don't subsidize. We have no cash to put into these deals.
Correct.
The operation of this, it has to be self-supporting. So we extract from a developer 10 units of affordable housing. We define how much it is below market and the criteria for it. And that presumably will run, because we're not owning it, we're just managing it.
Correct.
And so the developer will deal with whatever deficiencies there are, or the owner of the property would, if it's sold to an investor. But all we're saying is that this is how much rent you're going to get, and you can't own or occupy it. So it kind of stops there for those units. So when you start engaging nonprofits, they're typically not doing that kind of stuff. They're providing programming. It is, maybe I'm speaking too generally, but there's a lot of supportive housing in there. And supportive housing means money's going in, and sometimes programming is going in, etc. We're not in that business. That's not what we're about. We don't have the tools, we don't have the cash, there's all kinds of things around that. So if we want to, all we have to say, I think, is A, we're not putting money in, and B, the primary purpose is to manage some market rental aspect, which is really like the DP application we had tonight. That's going to be developer run, presumably, or an investor will come in and buy the units. All we're doing is just kind of making sure everybody plays by the rules that we've set. So that's the rental housing part of it. The subsidized part of it is we set the criteria and who can live there and whether they can stay there. But we're not putting cash in. It's when you get into the last pie, the long-term supportive housing, that I think we have to be very clear is A, we don't have cash, and if possible, we can sometimes partner up with nonprofits to do that. But I guess the question is, when we are talking, not we, I guess staff, is talking to developers in a rezoning application where there's some subsidized, there's some rental housing in the zoning mix. Is there ever any qualification about who or what goes into those units, except that we say it's got to be 80%. If the developer is going to run them, we're not going to see the people, theoretically, as long as they follow these rules and fit the criteria. The developer will go out there and get tenants, and some tenants may not have references, so they're not going to come in. We're not going to let them in, or they have a bad reputation in a previous property, just like any other landlord. So how involved would we get in that? And how would we take some of these units from whatever sector out of the mix and put them in the hands of a nonprofit to run them with some kind of a program? Because I'm not even sure that we have the ability to do that. Because we don't get them to manage, typically. We talk to the developers. I remember talking about this several times. When we zone something with a bunch of affordable housing units in it, what we're telling the developer is they're not for sale, they're rental, and we covenant that. And we put criteria around, like a housing agreement, put criteria around the rent that can be received and the people that can go in there. In other words, certain income levels, etc. And that's about it. Because it's the developer then, or then we sometimes will run the wait list, I guess. And maybe it's us then that picks the tenants for those units. Or is it the developer that picks the tenants for those units? And as long as they follow the criteria, we're happy.
Yeah, this policy provides that criteria that then informs the housing agreement that blocks that and ties it to the property. So the developer has a choice at that point. He has to follow the housing agreement and rent them to the eligible people at the rents prescribed by this policy. This is the work that we need, that the developers are asking us for when we're doing the CAC negotiations. What am I going to be giving? Okay, so we get to that point.
Well, let me just stop you there. So the eligible people, who selects them?
There are two options. One of which is the developer self-manages, or the developer then has a head lease and he leases to our partner, who then manages on the developer's behalf. So the partnering agreement is the opportunity for us to alter some of these rules a little bit that would require, so if we wanted to go below where we're at right now, that would require the partner to have those necessary supports and subsidies in place to top it up, to get it back to where this policy has. So there are two options. Either the developer self-manages or it's managed through the partner agreement that we're working on with Cedar Sky Community Services.
And if the developer self-manages, we've set the criteria.
Yes.
Is it the developer that goes out there and chooses the tenants?
Yes.
So we can say, okay, we've got a list, but the developer says, no, I don't like that guy because he trashed the last unit he was in, he doesn't have a reference, so I'm not going to rent to him. Standard landlord type of decision. Is it the developer's call then, or is it going to be our call running a list?
We may, through the partnering agreement, be able to develop that list, or the developer may be just managing his own tenant intake and outtake. We won't, if it's that sort of arrangement with the developer self-managing, we'll be auditing on an annual basis. We won't be looking at each intake and outtake process. As we won't when we have a partner agreement. It will be, we'll look periodically into the partner agreement and say, hey, who's in the units, how many people have moved in, moved out, but we're not going to be looking at and checking each tenancy transaction.
So then we won't have a wait list. We, the district, would not have a wait list. So it'd either be self-managed by the developer, who goes out there and maybe advertises for tenants, depending on the demand, or you have a nonprofit who has their own criteria with their own programming for people in there, and presumably has their own wait list if there is one.
Correct. Through the partnering agreement, they'll develop a wait list based on this policy.
Oh, absolutely. Get the criteria. But they're talking, now we're talking programming, which is them, and possibly, and now we're talking subsidy funding, because presumably it's a level of lower income. So then our role is really just to set the criteria and sit back and enforce it.
Correct.
Took a long time to get to that.
Told you, it
It
took a
is,
while for me to get my head around this whole
I
thing.
know, it's all
So
right.
now I'm wondering about the other discussion, you know, so does the policy just say that? Could it just say that? It's almost like a one-pager. I'm understating it, but
every time I bring this policy back, it seems to get a little longer, not shorter. There always seems to be, and I don't know if we're going to get to perfect on this, but we as staff need this because the developers are saying, well, affordability means what? And right now we're sort of winging it. So this, it may not be perfect, but it's where we're at. We need to have something to define eligibility and sort of get us moving along this path.
So I've got a few more hands. Sitting in the back of my mind is, does anyone think it would be helpful to talk about the governance structure before we try and nail down the perpetual housing affordable unit? Because Mr. Buxton hasn't even presented on that piece of this yet. But I'll go to Councillor Stoner and Councillor Herford after that.
I'll pass.
I'm curious, I like the idea of leaving the door open for opportunities from the nonprofit sector where it does align, sort of recognizing that is unlikely to be very often, but when that opportunity does arise, that it can be successful. So I like the cleaning up of the language that Mary Elliott provided. Do you have do we have an understanding of how things are being, or what's an understanding of how things are being managed currently as far as the number of developers that are, taking on this task or funding someone else to run it, whether that be a property management company or a nonprofit of some sort? Like what's that landscape like?
I don't think we've hit the decision point on a housing agreement that's affordable. We've had dedicated market rental, but I don't think we've crossed the threshold yet when we've had to deal with those issues of rental to a specified subset of people or eligible tenants. I don't think we've crossed that yet with any of our CAC units. We're getting close.
Okay. And then, thank you. And then is it possible to mandate on some level of partnering agreements so that management gets done?
No, I don't believe it is. I don't believe we can. I think that the developer will have the choice to self-manage or partner. I don't think we can legislatively force that. I mean, for most folks that manage their own units, it's probably relatively straightforward, provided that they can handle the eligibility requirements and are prepared to manage that.
Yeah.
Looking at all the stuff they probably don't typically look at when they're screening tenants.
Yeah, I'm curious if if it could be considered a good deal to have someone else do it, given the sort of the administrative burden of that. So, but okay, thank you. That answers my questions for now.
As I understand it, all this inventory is coming through CAC. So because it is coming through that mechanism, do we not have a lever to require the manager, or as part of the CAC, it's cash or it's a unit managed by this entity?
No, I don't believe we do. No. That's essentially forcing someone to use a specified property manager. Can we encourage? Yes. Can we mandate? No, I don't believe we can. We don't own the property. We're simply giving limited access. We are agreeing to provide limited access to those units, but those units still remain the property of the developer, and they are his or hers to deal with.
Just put in section 1.6. The district may, through a housing agreement or partner agreement with a non-profit housing society, specify that any PHA units may be restricted to a specific target market for group of persons, including those transitioning from other forms of social subsidized supported housing. And then just leave it at that. Like, why all the other, if we're just trying to open a door, why all of the other additions?
To be honest, we probably need 1.3 and 1.6 because one deals with 1.3 deals with the affordability rates. 1.6 deals with the people that are in terms of target market. So they're slightly different. One is income, one is people. The remainder, sort of 2.4, the amendments that I've made to 2.4, we could back those out, which are essentially just almost a repetition and a combination of 1.3 and 1.6. So I think we do need 1.3 and 1.6 because they speak to slightly different things.
Now we can take out 1.7 and merely change the wording in the procedures piece. I'm trying to simplify this to show that this is actually targeted at the middle part of the spectrum, although we are leaving a door open to some flexibility without changing the focus of this policy. And the other kind of fear I have sitting in the back of my mind is that council gets lobbied on almost every project to waive a DCC or to add more money to make it work for the not-for-profit housing community versus putting all of that effort into more substantial projects that are one-off, like Under One Roof, like the seniors building, where you can consolidate all that effort and build something in partnership with a developer or senior level of governance that makes a huge difference versus suddenly getting pressure on every single development. Well, this would work, council, if you just waived DCCs or if you added something from the affordable housing policy, and then suddenly we're sort of piecemealing that lower end of the spectrum. So that's I want to build across the whole spectrum. I'm not sure this policy can do all of that. So that's what I'm wrestling with. Is I want to leave the door open that they've asked to be open here, and at the same time, I want to be very careful about the level of consultation because I don't want to put highly subsidized units in an area of our community that's not walkable, that's not served by transit, that's like, it can't be every housing agreement, I don't think. Because there's some places where it just doesn't work because there's no services around.
Yeah, we actually sort of had that discussion at the integrated housing group, and that was their consensus too. Is there's a bunch of these. If there's one up in Quest, would we really be interested in it? Of course, they said no. So you're right. I mean,
1.7 says any housing agreement. I believe there should be some discretion on our part, and also we should maybe have a policy for building the low end of the spectrum through our new governance model. I think that's what I'm wrestling with.
To be honest, I think the best, if that's a concern, I would back out 1.7. I would back out the change to under the procedures, the number 4, and just maybe modify this. The best point in time to consult on this is right at the start of the process, and at that point, it's yes, no, go, no, go. So if I was going to leave that consultation in, I would leave it in here and back it out of... Okay, yes, I can...
Well, I wonder if we're trying to do too much with this agreement, because when you talk about that, they're really two different things, quite different things. Some are programmed housing, which is programmed in dollars, and it's going to go after a totally different target group. than just affordable rental housing, which is dealing with people in the workforce, et cetera, with jobs that just don't pay enough to get to full market housing. And it's going to sort of be part of the market housing market, like we saw earlier tonight with some of these units that are covenanted to be rental in perpetuity. So that part is simple. And we don't need to consult with anybody. Just figure out how to govern them, whether it's going to be the investor, the developer, or us. We set the criteria and all that kind of stuff and check in periodically. But when you start talking about partnering with nonprofits, those to me are practically like fingerprints. I mean, everyone would be different. It'd be hard to put it into one policy just because there's different nonprofits for one thing, and there's other nonprofits focusing on something else, and there's different levels of funding, and some might have programming, and some might not have programming, and some are workable in some locations and not in other locations. So I would be inclined to kind of take that and treat it as a second subject, and not try and sort of combine the two into one overreaching policy. I just think that, you know, that's kind of fraught with, just because there are too many sort of one-offs dealing with the nonprofit sector for that type of housing. I'd be inclined to deal with it like that. And it might simplify what we're trying to do, because the next discussion, if we get to it, is around governance. And that's quite a different program. I mean, that's you know, for one versus the other. There's all kinds of different issues around it. And anyway, I'm trying to simplify it, but I think we try to divide it.
At the risk of disappointing you, Mr. Buxton, because you've been working on this for a long time, I guess I want to just check in with council. So, do you feel prepared to approve this policy tonight, given the depth of the conversation, or would you like to see this come back to committee of the whole and be able to look at it there? Which I know adds step and time, but also usually when things come to this forum, they're ready to be approved, maybe with a few tweaks. But we're talking about taking out sections and rewriting sections, and that, for such an important policy, I'm not sure I necessarily want to do on the fly at 9:10. I only haven't seen the governance piece yet. So that is also an option available to us if people don't feel comfortable approving tonight.
I vote for committee of the whole.
I'll second.
Second by Councilor Herford. Any comments?
For those reasons.
Okay. Councilor Stoner?
I will just reiterate my support for the proposal that we basically just focus on including 1.3 and 1.6 and removing the remainder of the language that has been added, and that we focus the additional step on the procedure component into the CAC policy. I would, if now is an appropriate time, suggest some alternative language.
Wait on that one.
Okay.
Let's get the committee of the whole motion off the table, so that it comes back to committee of the whole with 1.3, 1.6, and the rest. If that's a good motion. And I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Do you want to propose something on the CAC policy wording?
Yeah, I propose that the language be changed to staff shall ensure that local nonprofit housing societies and organizations are made aware of opportunities for affordable housing as part of the process of negotiating any affordable housing remedy contributions, to determine their respective interest in obtaining access to and the operation of any PAH.
You're going to have to repeat
Yeah,
that.
that I probably
That's
got a
fair.
third of that, so.
Well, the last 2/3 was a reiteration of what's already up there. So it was just the first sentence. Staff shall ensure that local nonprofit housing societies and organizations are made aware of opportunities to negotiate affordable housing units as part of the process. That didn't work. Clear it the first time.
Well, we're gonna discuss that, so we can kick it around.
Right, it's coming back.
It's coming back.
Come back. Okay.
Appreciate the effort, and I'll apologize to council that I didn't work more closely with Mr. Buxton to understand what might be the outlying issues, so. Sorry.
That's okay. It's okay.
Okay, governance.
It's a big issue. I mean, we should be taking, if we're taking some time over something, it's probably this. Governance. Okay, this one's been a while. So there have been a number of reports through 2017 and 2018, so some of the reports predate this council. You have seen these before at an update I gave shortly after the election. But the sort of October 2018, there was an organisation evaluation report which proposed sort of 4 options. A blended implementation strategy was proposed, sort of engaging with a non-profit in the short term to a partner agreement and transitioning to a municipal housing corporation in the longer term. So the RFP that we put out in September that I withdrew based on comments at the last council meeting and comments from the integrated housing group is where this next phase of work is being proposed. So short term, we're really sort of at this long term, establishing some form of housing corporation agency in society. I'm reluctant to say a corporation because that is a very specific solution. And I'm not sure we're at that point. It's something that holds the housing function. A corporation is sort of a convenient sort of catch-all, but it's an agency or an entity that will perform the housing function for us. And the way that the RFP is set up, and I gave you sort of the deliverables in the background section. The rest of that agreement is, I think it's 27 pages and it's boilerplate. It's really boring reading. So the 2 phases are really to look at creating a facilitated table with the integrated housing group, determine their interest in collaborating or whether or not there's any interest from coordination right through to amalgamation. It's really trying to look at their interest and capacity in collaborating. We've had some discussions at that group around tenant management, and we've made the group's made some progress on that in integrating tenant management. Property management and asset management, we all have those issues in common, and to be honest, it's sort of, we could coordinate those quite capably. Program coordination is where it starts to get tricky because the seniors run seniors housing. Maureen and Under One Helping Hands deal with homelessness and emergency shelter. Cedar Sky sort of deals with that part of the spectrum just below the income threshold that we're looking at. So that's where it sort of gets a little tricky, and that's where an entity trying to deal with those issues gets a little more complex to deal with. So we're trying to look at how that collaboration could take place along that spectrum, along those functions. It would include the district. I mean, the intent was to look at a full service agency around objectives, options and functions and try and develop that collaboratively. But I mean, at the end of the day, it's going to be something that the district establishes. But it's not, what I know, the answer is not going to be an independent municipal housing corporation because it wouldn't have anything to do for quite some time. So what it will be is something that the district sets up that in some form coordinates or amalgamates with any one of those 4 entities in one form or another. So it's trying to gauge how far along that spectrum each of those entities is willing and able to come along. And then, and I realised today in talking with Miss Glenday is that I haven't done this very well in the language around. The result is, how does a full service agency come out of those conversations? So it is ownership, operation, management, development, policy, advocacy, all of those things, how those engagement, how all of those things handled by the... so I suspect that the language that I got in the RFP isn't hitting that mark. But that was the intent, but it is rather brief. So it's really that sort of first part is the facilitated table to see where those non-profits can join us along that spectrum. The second one is formalisation and implementation. So you take all that and then, how does that all fit together with the district's intent to form this entity that houses the housing, that holds the housing function. But I realise that might be difficult to read from the text that's in the attachment to the RTC. So.
Just given the discussion so far this evening, I mean, I have a lot of thoughts about this now that I didn't have before, and so I wonder if this is part of that committee of the whole discussion.
Well, let's kick it around a little bit.
Yeah, some guidance.
I meant that in the nicest possible way.
And I appreciate that.
Not Gary, you mean?
Yeah, no.
My intent would be bring back the previous policy cleaned up and amended based on the conversation. Similarly, if there's something more I can do with this tonight and bring you something back that's cleaner and more appropriate, that would help.
Got comments?
Yeah, well, I guess where all this discussion is taking me is, do we need to, in our CAC policy, talk about a certain portion of CACs dedicated to the below 30% below median sector that Helping Hands and CSI Community Services deal with? And that's kind of where we have that piece. Our housing policy and this deals with the 30% below median and above, kind of that very first picture we saw, and that's it. In general, in terms of responsibility, and maybe there's a round table where there's discussions about how to facilitate people moving from one sector to another, but the sort of responsibility that we're taking on, that this agency taking on, is that 30% and above. Again, from that first diagram, and addressing some of the concerns of Helping Hands and See the Sky of seeing themselves in our policies and making sure we're not getting left out. For me, that's, again, CAC policy, I think, as a starting point. What's our general, how much do we think we can resource these types of things?
I would just add, before I let Mr. Buxton answer the question, is that over time, certainly through the last councils, we tried to make the CAC policy less restrictive so that we had more flexibility. So right now it's just an affordable housing fund, which we then have full discretion to allocate how we see fit. So the more you define it, the smaller the pots get, because this goes in this pot, so it takes longer to accumulate what you need to actually be of service. So that's why it all goes into just one affordable housing bucket, which we would contemplate would be for the lower income residents in our community.
Yeah, I can accept that. I guess it seems like though we're trying to, because it's not specific and it doesn't set aside anything specific to them, I think they're asking for some sort of commitment elsewhere in these documents and committees, which seems to complicate them a lot more than I think they maybe need to.
I would agree. I would discourage council from cracking open the CAC policy and trying to solve that issue in that policy. I think if anywhere, solve it in the PAH policy in the manner in which we've discussed tonight. Keep the CAC policy as general. We want some affordable housing units. Affordability gets defined in the PAH policy. We've made some progress on that tonight. So it would discourage council from sort of backing all the way up. I think that policy is good for now.
So, I had a vague recollection. I mean, your comment about you formed it today, there'd be nothing for it to do, caught me, and I was just thinking back, and I seem to recall at some point we thought that there was a threshold where we would want to incorporate this company, society, whatever it is, to start managing. Because right now we've only got, well, we won't have a lot of units for a while. You know, these things have to get built first. And my recollection was it somewhere around 125 or 150 or something like that. But I'm kind of fuzzy about that, to be frank. So it's right now, it doesn't seem that it's going to be happening soon, because these things are just sort of now just coming to us. And so we'll either dish off the management or they'll be investor managed. We'll set criteria. I'm not saying we don't do that. But the actual management part of these things, I think there probably is a threshold somewhere, and I don't know what it is, before we really want to sort of step in, hire somebody to do it, set up a little bit of a structure and carry on. But then I'm led to the question of what is it we're managing? What are we doing? And I'm back to the thought that we're talking tonight about two different types of product. We're talking about housing that requires subsidy and maybe programming. And we're not in the subsidy business, and we're not in the programming business. Those are entirely provincial responsibilities, and we don't want to go there. So if we ever did come into housing that we wanted that for, or somehow thought that was the way to go, we dish it off to somebody else. So we're not talking about governing that stuff at all once we make that decision that that's the way it's going. So then what we're doing is we're managing these units that we get probably mostly from developers and CACs. I mean, but we might have something come along like a Buckley Avenue that we don't end up in the same structure with BC Housing with. It's more like we were talking about originally, which means that we might end up as the manager, because it's all kind of just below market rents and it's self-supporting, etc. So at that point, then you've got a property manager with a building, and that's a significant responsibility. But in the meantime, we're setting criteria, and these units that we're getting from developers, probably, I'm guessing, but I would guess that a lot of them aren't going to come to us for management. They'll have to live by our criteria. But if I'm a developer, I think this is the way it works, and maybe I'm wrong, but you know, we say, okay, the rentals for these few units here is 80% of market. They don't want to be in the property management business. What they want to do is get cash and go on to the next project. So they'll sell them to an investor for a reduced price because of the reduced income. So now you have somebody sitting in who knows where, getting rent checks, just like any other landlord that's rented out something. And where's our role in that process, apart from periodically auditing? And so what is that corporation function until we get an actual project or building to start managing? And when this whole thing started, I kind of, and this goes back several years now, I was kind of thinking like the Whistler Housing Authority, which to my knowledge has been quite successful as a director and staff and so forth, and manages a whole bunch of different units, manages a waiting list, vets people for the waiting list. Some of the units are actually owned, and a lot of them are rentals, and I don't know the mix. You know, some might be subsidized, some not. I'm not sure that they're into any kind of supportive housing, but that's kind of, but they do the management. They are property managers. They're the ones that are managing these units, and so you don't end up with this owner-investor somewhere that's collecting the rent and making sure the tenant pays on time and doesn't trash the place and whatever, like the landlord might. So I think we kind of have to figure that out, and maybe, like Councillor Pettengill says, maybe it does go back to the CAC policy where we say, you know, part of the deal in this zoning is these units are going to be assigned for management to that. And that's what we want to do. And that's, we're going to manage them, set the waiting list, etc. Because an owner investor can be renting it to their sister or cousin or something like that. And it doesn't sort of touch our waiting list, whoever has our waiting list. And so I'm kind of just wondering how this thing unfolds. And so I think, you know, once we decide what the scope is, and I think the governance issue will become just a lot more clear, whether it's a company or a society, frankly, I don't think makes any difference. It just is what is the scope and what's it expected to do and what will it control, I think is more germane to it. And whether or not, I go back to it, I think it's fundamental now, the more I think about it, we separate stuff that's just market and sub-market and the management of that versus the stuff that requires programming and subsidy. Because one we can be in, the other one I don't think we should be in.
Yeah, I don't think there's any suggestion that we get into the subsidised, I'll call it the subsidised housing, except if somebody else is going to run it on our behalf.
Well, in which case we just assign the whole thing over to them. I mean, you know, what is our role in that? Are we just sort of a head landlord, or do we need to even be that? You know, I mean, just
initially through a partnering agreement, but when there are enough units, both of the subsidised and the market ones, is there any sense in amalgamating those entities to form one entity that does property management, tenant intake, asset management?
and
That's
program?
where the other, there's sort of, you can establish critical mass in two ways, one of which is we acquire units through CACs or we amalgamate with somebody. And then you automatically have critical mass.
One of these non-profit changes.
Yes.
Or a collaboration of.
So I see, the thing is, I don't know where this thing ends up,
Yeah.
other than I know it's not a freestanding municipal housing corporation, because that's just not appropriate in our circumstances. So how do we get to figuring out what that is with the other folks that do it and with our objectives? That's what this governance RFP, that work needs to do.
So,
Because I'm nervous about getting into the supported housing business in any way. So I'll just stop there and turn it over to you.
other thoughts? I have thoughts, so I'll go if no one else has thoughts right now. I think the step about providing an opportunity for these organizations to see where along that spectrum they could land, I think that's important, but I think it's out of order. So I would say that sort of the vision and mission and purpose of the governance needs to be established by council as a first step. Because I think when we set that strategic goal, which was to have a governance structure that will facilitate growth, so that's the development part, and management of affordable housing stock. So I think understanding where those nonprofits could be on that spectrum is important, whether it rolls into one organization or they operate separately, but our governance body does deal with them to manage that lower end. So for me, it's, we would set the vision. It would look at, the consultant would look at options that are out there. I think that it should help to facilitate affordable housing across the spectrum, because the last bullet in our affordable piece is eventually moving to affordable home ownership in the same way that the Whistler Housing Authority does. So I think this plan has to contemplate how it facilitates both the lowest end of affordable housing as well as the highest end, and what is its role in that. And so I think the phase 2 is then facilitating a table with nonprofits to see what their interest is. That's 4 boards. That's a lot of complexity to understand in where this goes. So I just don't think that's our first port of call. I think they have to be working with what our objectives are as council for this structure.
Thank you. And earlier I asked about mandating the partnering agreement. I just want to make sure that we somehow make it appealing, this entity, an appealing entity to manage these units, so we don't end up creating these but not actually having them land into that pool, and thus delaying the critical mass that we need to move forward. I don't know how we do that. That's kind of where I was going with the mandating partnering agreement. Councilor Ray's touched on similar sort of area of in his comments, and I don't know how we get there, but I want to make sure that if we have 10 affordable units come through a project, a development of some sort, that we stand a strong shot of getting that into our proposed governance structure. And I don't know, I haven't seen that here. It just says, well, it could be an option or they could manage it themselves, but why would they choose our governance structure over doing it themselves? I don't see that motivation there. Do you?
Something needs to sustain this body. Wouldn't it be rents? Wouldn't they all need to come into?
Yes, and we can encourage them by making the requirements and the eligibility requirements. So they're going to have to do a lot more work than they typically would. Income and asset testing. They're going to have to do asset testing. Look at T1s and all of that stuff. Check residency. So it's a lot more convoluted than probably their typical process, and particularly if they're having to draw from a wait list that the partnering agency or the entity holds. There's a lot of incentives then to just say, you know what, why don't you deal with this? I just don't know that we can say you have to.
Well, yeah, and I'm not. I mean, I understand that that's not necessarily something that we can do. I just want to make sure that it is appealing. Now that said, that is a lot of work, an administrative burden that this entity could take on, and then it just begs where it's funded from. We're talking about ongoing subsidies. We're not doing. There's an operational component to this that's substantial. If we have 150 or whatever that threshold is of units or more to manage, and I'm curious where that.
I'm getting very close to having that number through the partnering agreement with Sea to Sky.
Okay.
We've got to go around one more time and double check the numbers, but we're getting close to a number. I mean, it's not going to be free for the district, but it's not a huge cost. Certainly cheaper than setting up our own department.
Any other questions? Is that enough guidance?
Yeah, I can certainly come back with something that's of that effect. Yeah, so there's some almost scoping work with council, or clarity of objectives first before the consultation. We may even be able to do that in the RFP and provide that direction through the RFP. We'll see where the conversations take us at committee of the whole.
Thank you, Mr. Buxton.
Thank you.
Thank you, council. Our consent agenda. Is there anything that anybody wants to pull from the consent agenda? And we did add Ms. Phillips' response to Kate Friesen about DP 528. So there's a piece of late correspondence on the blues. Anybody pulling anything? I'm pulling 3. Anything else? Okay, motion to approve the consent agenda moved by Council French, seconded by Council Stoner. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Correspondence action requested, so invitation to join an international appeal to promote nuclear disarmament 2020 for council consideration. This would be to support Canada joining one of the treaties that we have not signed on to.
Or move that we, do they know letter of support?
Yes, I believe it's a letter they requested.
I'll write a letter of support.
Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Herford. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. D. Grange, temporary docking solutions for Squamish water sports. That correspondence from Squamish water sports be referred to staff for a response. Moved by Councillor French, seconded by Councillor Stoner. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Chief Del Harry and John McCandless, Bright New Day Circle and Attachments for council consideration. This is an invite, so anybody can go. Consideration part for any funding? It said, happy to have you at the event, or if you'd like to sponsor, you can. That was how it was laid out.
There's a breakdown of sponsorship options starting on page 325.
We don't really have a sponsorship policy. We never got finished, did we? So, move receipt or move something else?
I'll move receipt at this point, speak to it briefly.
I'll second it.
So I have signed up, I am attending, I'm curious to see what the event is and look forward, to the next year, develop our sponsorship policy and see if this makes sense going forward.
Any other comments? Did you catch that, Councillor Anderson?
I didn't, I'm sorry,
I
Councillor.
apologize. So I am attending this, and so I said I look forward to it, look forward to developing our sponsorship policy hopefully over the next year, and we can come back and see if it makes sense to sponsor this next year.
Thank you.
Call a question. All those in favor, receipt. Opposed, motion carries. I just wanted to bring everyone's attention to the fact that Multicultural Day has been moved from where it typically has been on Canada Day, July 1 to February 1st. And so they're hoping that that gives more people an opportunity to attend a worthwhile event. So I just want to speak to that. And I'll move receipt. Seconded by Councillor Stoner. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Correction to December 10th special business meeting minutes. And to approve those as corrected.
No.
Moved by. Wait. Yeah.
On the resolution regarding Big Brothers has me voting against. I voted in favor of that one. To make that correction.
Noted. So approve those. And I think we're also correcting the word cash to cash in lieu. So move the, approve the amended minutes. Correct minutes. Moved by Councillor Anderson, second by Councillor French. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. These are recommendations from Committee of the Whole last week that the district received the report from Community Planning on the wildfire development permit area. Move receipt. Moved by Councillor Herford, Nope, Stoner, seconded by Councillor Herford. All those in favor? Opposed, motion carries. That council supports in principle the 2023 Squamish Whistler World Junior Under 23 Nordic Ski Championships. Write a letter of support and direct staff to investigate gaming grant options for the event. Moved by Councillor Ray, seconded by Councillor French. All those in favor? Opposed, motion carries. Hunter Place rezoning, OCP amendment. Council received the Hunter Place rezoning report for initial information and provide feedback as follows. I'm not going to read that all out. Moved by Councillor Stoner, seconded by Councillor Race. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Cemetery master plan, that we received a report from community planning from last week, and that with council comments received on January 14th are taken into consideration, and that council approve option 3 as the direction of fees in relation to operating costs. Moved by Councillor Stoner, seconded by Councillor Herford. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
I think I opposed last time, so stay consistent.
Opposed, Councillor Pettinger. Motion carries. And that the District of Squamish provides feedback to the province on the proposed modernization of the emergency program executed by the emergency coordinator. Moved by Councillor French, seconded by Councillor Herford. All those in favor? Opposed, motion carries. Nothing under anything else? Any open question periods for clarification?
Oh, actually, yeah, this time I do.
Yeah, I'm sure you might.
No, it's a short one. I was curious to know the Wilson Crescent, Stephen Chua, Squamish Chief newspaper. I was curious, what's happening to the Wilson Crescent public hearing? Is that being rescheduled, or is it just indefinitely being put down?
Mr. Buxton, do you want to answer that?
We had some changed drawings from the developer, so we couldn't get that stuff processed in time for the public hearing, or there's going to be new material. So they've changed some stuff, so we couldn't proceed on the schedule that we have. So it's nothing's changed other than we've just got to reschedule and produce the new material back at the new.
It's just being put up for a later date then?
Mm-hmm. Correct, yes.
And is Elmo Councillor Anderson's new alternate? That's all.
You don't have to answer that. Councilor staff announcements. Are there any? Councilor French?
Quickly, on Thursday, January 16th, I participated in a grassroots tiny homes discussion with about 20 other people, and the event allowed that group of interested folks to talk about microhomes, sustainable living, shipping container reuse, and policy issues relating to all of those, and to share thoughts and network at the Aligned Collective. This is an ongoing conversation, I believe, and there will be future discussions amongst the people that are interested in this topic as the tiny home movement picks up speed and grows.
Thank you. Councillor Stoner.
I just want to speak to last week's public engagement sessions, both the council coffee calls that happened as well as the budget session that happened. A huge thanks to staff and my council colleagues, as well as our community members who showed up and participated in all those. Some really valuable discussions throughout the process. I attended 2 of the council coffee crawls and had great discussions at both, but in particular the one at Quest probably saw about 25 people participate, give or take, and so I think it just goes to show that when you actually locate the council coffee crawl in a location that is near the people, maybe it increases our participation rates. But thanks to everybody who came out last week and for staff for all the additional hours that went into making this event happen.
Thank you. Councillor Bird. Councillor
Thank you. I'll echo Councillor Stoner's comments on the coffee crawl and the budget engagement. It was great. Neither of those events were held under ideal weather conditions, so it was great to have everyone brave the weather and come out and participate. And to that end, over the last few days, well, the last week, I guess, with this last dump of snow that we've had, it's been amazing to see our district staff out. I know that was a lot of hours for everybody, and I think they did an excellent job keeping our town moving during these storms, which we're not honestly accustomed to. And so kudos to district staff for that, and also to the members of the community that stepped up or executed their responsibility of clearing their pathways in front of their homes. And it takes us all to sort of get back operating when those big events happen. So kudos to everybody that did their part throughout that. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pettingill.
So I had the opportunity to see the mayor's presentation on Svalbard at the Bag on Saturday. And I think there's a little more content than the council presentation, a little more time. And maybe it's the mayor's fault that I was there today, especially on some of the climate issues, because it was a reminder that we got to get moving on some of this stuff. But just also, seeing the enthusiasm of the people there, the people on the trip, struck by the teachers that attended who hadn't had presentations at their schools. I know, because my wife is one of them, is very eager to have the mayor come and speak, and so seeing how much this citizen science and the pictures and the impact that has on people, and to make them sort of really understand why we have to move quickly on some of these things was great. So it's a really fantastic event, and thank you, Mayor Elliott, for doing that.
Thanks for that. Any other comments tonight? Thanks for coming on freezing rain night. Okay, this is it. Motion to terminate by Councillor Rufford, second by Councillor French. All those in favor? Opposed, motion carries. Thank you.